The moon of Lycius hung in the skies of Kievar like a permanent reminder of subjugation. What had once been a mining colony orbiting the prosperous tech world had transformed into something far more sinister. A prison moon where the tech guilds of Kievar sent their dissidents, malcontents, and anyone who dared challenge their authority. The atmosphere was thin, the conditions harsh, and the overseers brutal. It was into this bleak environment that the infant Primarch designated as the 19th fell, his gestation pod scattered across the galaxy by forces unknown. Unlike many of his brother Primarchs who were discovered by local populations or raised by adoptive families, the pale child who would become Corvus Corax was found by the prisoners of Lycius. These were not ordinary criminals, but political prisoners, miners, laborers, and intellectuals who had challenged the oppressive rule of the tech guilds. They named the child Corvus, meaning raven in an ancient Terran language, a fitting name for one with hair as black as a raven's wing and skin as pale as moonlight. The prisoners of Lycius raised Corax in secret, hiding him from the watchful eyes of the prison guards and surveillance systems. As he grew at an accelerated rate, typical of the Emperor's gene-crafted sons, Corax demonstrated remarkable abilities. He could blend into shadows with preternatural skill, move without making a sound, and most importantly, absorb knowledge at an astonishing pace. The prisoners taught him everything they knew: engineering, mining techniques, history, and the bitter lessons of oppression. By his adolescence, Corax had already begun formulating plans for rebellion. He understood that the prisoners of Lycius, though numerous, could not hope to defeat their oppressors through conventional means. The tech guilds possessed superior weapons, armor, and control over the vital systems of the moon. This imbalance of power led Corax to develop what would become his signature approach to warfare: strike from the shadows, hit vulnerable points, disappear before retaliation could be mounted, and gradually erode the enemy's strength and will to fight. The revolution on Lycius began with small acts of sabotage. Communication arrays mysteriously failed, supply shipments went missing, guards disappeared while on patrol. The tech guilds responded with increased brutality, but this only fueled the growing resistance. Corax had studied the prison systems thoroughly and understood its vulnerabilities. He organized the prisoners into small, disciplined cells, each with specific objectives but limited knowledge of the overall plan, a precaution against betrayal that would later become doctrine within his legion. The decisive moment came when Corax led a daring raid on the prison's main armory. With weapons now in hand, the rebellion spread rapidly. The tech guilds, accustomed to dealing with unarmed prisoners, found themselves facing an organized, well-led insurgency. Within months, Lycius belonged to the rebels. Corax established defensive positions and turned the moon's weapons systems against Kievar itself, effectively holding the planet hostage. The newly liberated Lycius was renamed Deliverance, a name that reflected both its liberation and its role as a base from which to deliver the people of Kievar from the tech guild's oppression. Corax established a provisional government on Deliverance, one based on principles of justice and equality that stood in stark contrast to the rigid hierarchies of Kievar. He did not seek to destroy the tech guilds entirely, but to reform them, understanding that their technical knowledge was valuable and necessary. It was during this period of consolidation that the Emperor arrived. The Master of Mankind had been searching for his scattered sons, reuniting them with their genetic legions and bringing their worlds into the expanding Imperium. The Emperor's massive fleet appeared in the skies of Kievar, a sight that might have terrified the population had they not already been living under the shadow of Deliverance and its weapons. The meeting between the Emperor and Corax was not recorded in detail, but accounts suggest that Corax recognized his creator immediately. The Emperor explained Corax's origins, the Great Crusade to unite humanity, and the legion that awaited his leadership. Corax accepted his role, but with one condition: that the Emperor help liberate Kievar from the tech guilds. The Emperor agreed, and with the combined might of Imperial forces and the rebels of Deliverance, the tech guilds were quickly overthrown. The 19th Legion that Corax inherited had been operating without their Primarch for several decades of the Great Crusade. Known informally as the Pale Nomads due to their pallid complexions and lack of a permanent base of operations, they had developed a reputation for rapid strike operations and precision compliance actions. The Legion recruited primarily from Terra in these early days, drawing from the populations of the Xeric tribes, Asiatic dustlands, and the Central Europan hives, regions known for producing hardy, resilient individuals. When Corax took command, he found a legion that was effective but lacked a cohesive identity and doctrine. The Pale Nomads fought well, but without the distinctive character that marked other legions like the brutal World Eaters or the stoic Imperial Fists. Corax set about reshaping them in accordance with the principles that had served him well during the Lycius Rebellion. The transition from Pale Nomads to Raven Guard began with changes to recruitment. Corax established Deliverance as the Legion's new homeworld and began inducting the sons of former prisoners into the Astartes ranks. These recruits brought with them the cultural memory of oppression and liberation, a perspective that reinforced Corax's emphasis on fighting for humanity rather than merely conquering in the Emperor's name. Tactically, Corax implemented sweeping changes. The Legion's existing proficiency in rapid strikes was enhanced and refined into a comprehensive doctrine of guerrilla warfare. Raven Guard Astartes were trained to operate in small, autonomous units capable of conducting operations deep behind enemy lines with minimal support. They became masters of stealth, ambush, and precision targeting of enemy command structures and vital systems. This approach stood in marked contrast to legions like the Death Guard or Iron Warriors, who favored attritional warfare and frontal assaults. Corax believed that Astartes were too valuable to waste in meat grinder battles. Instead, he taught that a single squad, properly placed and timed, could achieve what a company might fail to accomplish through brute force. This philosophy was encapsulated in the Raven Guard's battle cry, Victoris aut mortis, victory or death, signifying their commitment to achieving objectives regardless of the odds. The Legion's appearance changed to reflect their new identity. The pale skin characteristic of both Corax and the original Terran recruits became a defining feature, emphasized rather than concealed. Their armor was painted a deep, matte black that absorbed light, making them difficult to detect in low light conditions. The white helmet and shoulder pad trim provided stark contrast, reminiscent of the coloration of certain Terran corvid species. The most significant symbol adopted by the Legion was the raven itself. In ancient Terran mythology, ravens were associated with wisdom, foresight, and death, all concepts that resonated with the Legion's approach to warfare. The raven's ability to soar above the battlefield, observing everything while remaining unseen, perfectly encapsulated Corax's tactical philosophy. The three-headed raven that became the Legion's emblem represented the multiple aspects of their warfare: intelligence gathering, precision strikes, and battlefield control. Beyond mere symbolism, Corax instituted practical changes to the Legion's equipment and organization. He worked closely with the Mechanicum to develop specialized wargear such as jump packs that allowed for rapid deployment and extraction, reflex shields that disrupted targeting systems, and sound-dampening modifications to power armor. The Legion's vehicles were similarly modified for stealth operations, with reduced acoustic and thermal signatures. Organizationally, the Raven Guard diverged from the rigid structures favored by legions like the Ultramarines. While maintaining the formal company and chapter divisions common to all legions, Corax emphasized operational flexibility. Units were regularly reconfigured based on mission requirements rather than adhering strictly to predetermined formations. This adaptability became a hallmark of the Raven Guard approach, allowing them to respond quickly to changing battlefield conditions. The cultural transformation of the Legion extended to their traditions and rituals. Drawing from the heritage of Deliverance, the Raven Guard adopted ceremonies commemorating liberation and justice. New recruits would spend time in the old mining tunnels of Lycius, learning firsthand the conditions that had shaped their Primarch's worldview. They studied not only combat techniques, but also the principles that underpinned their Legion's purpose, that the Astartes existed to protect humanity, not to rule over it. This philosophical foundation distinguished the Raven Guard from some of their brother legions. While others increasingly viewed themselves as inherently superior to baseline humans, Corax maintained that the Astartes were servants of humanity, albeit extraordinarily powerful ones. This perspective stemmed directly from his experiences on Lycius, where he had witnessed the courage and resilience of ordinary people fighting against oppression. As the Raven Guard took their place in the Great Crusade, their distinctive approach proved highly effective in certain compliance actions. Worlds that might have required protracted sieges or costly assaults by other legions were brought into compliance through targeted operations against leadership or critical infrastructure. The Raven Guard became specialists in decapitation strikes, removing hostile leadership with minimal collateral damage to civilian populations and infrastructure. As the newly christened Raven Guard took to the stars under Corax's leadership, they quickly established themselves as masters of shadow warfare during the Emperor's Great Crusade. The 19th Legion's transition from the Pale Nomads to the Raven Guard was marked not just by a change in name and appearance, but by a fundamental shift in combat doctrine that would define their contributions to the expanding Imperium. The Corvus Sodality campaign represented one of the Raven Guard's most notable early victories under Corax's command. The Sodality consisted of 12 star systems ruled by a technologically advanced human civilization that had maintained independence throughout Old Night. Their defensive networks were formidable, with overlapping void shields, automated response platforms, and a substantial fleet of ships using archaeotech weapon systems. Initial Imperial diplomatic overtures were met with outright hostility, and preliminary skirmishes by other Imperial forces had resulted in costly stalemates. When the Raven Guard were assigned to the compliance action, Corax approached the problem differently. Rather than engaging the Sodality's impressive defenses directly, he deployed small infiltration teams to the capital world of Zenith Prime. These teams, utilizing prototype phase iron technology that partially shifted them out of conventional reality, bypassed the planetary defense grid entirely. Over 3 solar weeks, they gathered intelligence on the Sodality's command structure, identified key weaknesses, and placed beacons for precision teleport insertions. The main assault began with a coordinated strike against all 12 systems simultaneously. While the Sodality's forces braced for conventional attacks, Raven Guard kill teams materialized directly within command bunkers and defense coordination centers. The precision of these strikes was remarkable. Within 6 hours, 87% of the Sodality's senior leadership had been neutralized. Planetary defense systems, suddenly without centralized control, were systematically disabled by secondary teams. When the main Imperial fleet finally moved in, they encountered only disorganized, piecemeal resistance. The Corvus Sodality capitulation was achieved with minimal infrastructure damage and civilian casualties, a testament to the effectiveness of Corax's approach. The intact manufacturing capabilities and technological knowledge of the Sodality were seamlessly integrated into the Imperium, strengthening rather than depleting its resources. This pattern would repeat throughout the Raven Guard's Great Crusade campaigns: precision over brute force, strategic decapitation over attritional warfare. The Raven Guard's combat doctrine evolved significantly under Corax's guidance, emphasizing 3 interconnected principles: intelligence gathering, precision strikes, and operational flexibility. Before any major engagement, Raven Guard scout units would infiltrate enemy territory, sometimes operating independently for months to build comprehensive intelligence pictures. These scouts utilized specialized equipment including Auspex jammers, false heat signature generators, and optical camouflage cloaks, technology that pushed the boundaries of what the Mechanicum considered acceptable modification. The information gathered by these forward elements informed meticulously planned strike operations. Unlike the World Eaters who reveled in frontal assaults or the Iron Warriors who excelled at siege warfare, the Raven Guard specialized in surgical strikes against critical targets. A typical Raven Guard operation might involve simultaneous attacks against command nodes, communication hubs, and supply depots, effectively paralyzing an enemy force before they realized they were under attack. This approach required exceptional coordination and timing. Raven Guard Astartes trained extensively in small unit tactics, with particular emphasis on operating when cut off from command structures. Squad leaders were encouraged to show initiative and adapt to changing circumstances rather than adhering rigidly to predetermined plans. This operational flexibility became a hallmark of the 19th Legion, allowing them to overcome numerically superior forces through superior mobility and tactical acumen. The Portales campaign demonstrated the effectiveness of this doctrine against non-human adversaries. When a cluster of worlds in the Segmentum Tempestus was discovered to be under the control of a Xenos species known as the Crave, psychic predators who enslaved human populations as both labor and food sources, the Raven Guard were tasked with their eradication. Rather than targeting the numerous Crave warrior forms directly, Corax identified the psychically gifted Director, Cast, as the critical vulnerability. Utilizing specially trained sick-resistant Astartes, the Raven Guard infiltrated the central Crave hive structures and eliminated the Directors in synchronized strikes. Without psychic coordination, the warrior forms became disorganized and vulnerable to conventional attacks. The campaign that Imperial strategists had estimated would take years of bloody fighting was concluded in less than 3 months, with the human populations largely preserved. The Raven Guard's unique approach to warfare necessitated specialized wargear and technology. Perhaps most iconic was the Mark VI Corvus pattern power armor, developed with direct input from Corax himself. The Mark VI featured reduced power coupling noise, enhanced auto senses, and a sleeker profile than previous Marks. The beaked helmet, originally designed to house enhanced respirator equipment for toxic environments, became a distinctive feature that earned the pattern its Corvus designation. Jump packs were particularly favored by Raven Guard assault units, allowing for rapid deployment and extraction. Corax worked with Mechanicum Tech adepts to modify standard patterns for reduced acoustic signatures and extended fuel efficiency. These modifications enabled the creation of specialist formations like the Dark Fury assault squads, who could strike from unexpected vectors and vanish before enemy forces could effectively respond. The Legion also pioneered the use of shadow sight lumens, specialized visors that enhanced low light visibility while minimizing telltale emissions. Combined with chameleonic cloaking technology and noise suppressors, these innovations allowed Raven Guard units to move undetected through environments where other Astartes would be easily spotted. The Mechanicum viewed some of these modifications with suspicion, particularly those that altered the sacred designs of power armor, but Corax's status as a Primarch generally shielded his Legion from formal censure. Vehicle modifications followed similar principles. Raven Guard Rhinos and Land Raiders were equipped with sound baffles on their engines and matte black ablative coatings that absorbed both light and auspex pings. Drop pods used by the Legion featured enhanced stabilization systems for precision deployment in difficult terrain, allowing insertion into dense urban environments or mountainous regions where conventional landings would be impossible. These technological adaptations complemented the Legion's preference for lightning warfare, striking hard at vulnerable points and withdrawing before the enemy could bring their full strength to bear. While this approach earned respect from some quarters, it also drew criticism from Primarchs who favored more direct methods. Perdurabo of the Iron Warriors notably dismissed Raven Guard tactics as the warfare of cowards, a sentiment that created lasting tension between the two legions. The relationships between Corax and his brother Primarchs were complex and varied. He formed a particularly strong bond with Robute Guilliman of the Ultramarines, despite their differing tactical philosophies. Both Primarchs shared a fundamental belief in the importance of civilian infrastructure and minimizing collateral damage during compliance actions. They frequently coordinated campaigns in the Eastern Fringe, with the Raven Guard softening targets before Ultramarines forces secured final compliance. With Sanguinius of the Blood Angels, Corax found common ground in their shared humanity and concern for the oppressed. Joint operations between the two legions were rare but remarkably effective, combining the Blood Angels' aerial assault prowess with Raven Guard infiltration capabilities. After one such campaign against Dark Age weapon vaults on Galispar, Sanguinius gifted Corax a master-crafted power sword of Balite design, which Corax carried as a secondary weapon thereafter. Corax's relationship with Horus Lupercal was more complicated. Initially, Corax respected the War Master's tactical acumen and charismatic leadership. However, as the Great Crusade progressed, he grew concerned about Horus's increasing willingness to employ overwhelming force when subtler approaches might suffice. During the compliance of the Farinata system, Corax publicly disagreed with Horus's strategy of orbital bombardment, arguing that targeted strikes against the ruling technocracy would achieve compliance with less destruction. Though Horus ultimately deferred to Corax's expertise in this instance, the disagreement created a lingering tension between them. The most pronounced friction existed between Corax and Perturabo, their legions' contrasting approaches to warfare, the Iron Warrior's preference for siege and attrition versus the Raven Guard's emphasis on mobility and precision, led to fundamental disagreements about resource allocation and campaign planning. During the Therican suppression, these tensions erupted into open argument when Perturabo accused Corax of abandoning Iron Warrior's units to enemy fire. Though an investigation cleared the Raven Guard of wrongdoing, the incident soured relations between the legions permanently. With Conrad Kurz of the Night Lords, Corax maintained a wary distance. Though both legions operated in the shadows, their purposes and methods differed fundamentally. Where the Raven Guard struck with surgical precision to minimize civilian casualties, the Night Lords employed terror and atrocity as weapons. Corax found Kurz's methods repugnant and made little effort to hide his disapproval, further isolating the already distant Primarch of the 8th Legion. The Raven Guard's contributions to the Great Crusade, while less heralded than those of more visible legions, were nonetheless substantial. Their specialized approach proved particularly valuable in preserving infrastructure and populations that would strengthen the expanding Imperium. The Akam Sodos cluster, a region of densely populated hive worlds, was brought to compliance largely through Raven Guard operations targeting the ruling oligarchy while leaving manufacturing capabilities intact. Similarly, the technologically advanced forge states of the Grail Abyss were integrated into the Mechanicum through careful Raven Guard diplomacy, backed by the implied threat of precision strikes. As the Great Crusade entered its later stages, the Raven Guard had grown from the relatively anonymous Pale Nomads into one of the most distinctive legions in the Emperor's service. Their reputation for appearing seemingly from nowhere to strike at the heart of enemy forces made them both respected and feared. More importantly, their fundamental commitment to liberation rather than mere conquest set them apart from some of their increasingly militant brother legions. The black ships of the Raven Guard emerged from the warp above Istvan V, their sleek profiles cutting through the void as they joined the massive Imperial Armada assembling to punish Horus's treachery. The mood aboard the flagship Shadow of the Emperor was somber but resolute. Intelligence reports from Istvan III had confirmed the unthinkable. Horus Lupercal, once the Emperor's most trusted son, had turned traitor along with his 16th Legion. Even more disturbing were indications that the Death Guard, Emperor's children, and World Eaters had joined his rebellion. Corax studied the tactical displays with his senior officers, his pale features illuminated by the blue glow of hololithic projections showing the Urgal Depression, their designated landing zone. The Raven Guard had been assigned to the first wave of the assault, alongside the Iron Hands of Ferrus Manus and the Salamanders led by Vulcan. This placement was unusual for a legion that typically operated through stealth and surprise, but the circumstances were far from typical. "This will be a direct confrontation," Corax told his assembled commanders. "The traitors have fortified the Urgal Depression, expecting our assault. We cannot rely on our usual methods of infiltration when the enemy knows we are coming." The deployment plan called for the 3 loyalist legions of the first wave to establish a beachhead that would be reinforced by 4 additional legions in the second wave: the Night Lords, Iron Warriors, Alpha Legion, and Word Bearers. With 7 legions against 4, Imperial strategists predicted a swift, if bloody, victory. As drop pods and gunships streaked through Istvan V's atmosphere, the Raven Guard deployed in a tight formation on the eastern flank of the Urgal Depression. Corax led from the front, as was his custom in major engagements. His artificer armor, midnight black with white trim, stood out among his sons as he activated the power field of his signature weapon, a massive power whip called the Panoply of the Raven Lord. Beside him, veteran squads from the Talons and Blackguard companies formed the vanguard of the Legion's assault. The initial landing was met with punishing fire from entrenched traitor positions. Horus had prepared well, establishing layered defenses with interlocking fields of fire. The terrain of the Urgal Depression, with its rocky outcroppings and narrow defiles, channeled the Loyalist forces into killing zones covered by heavy weapons. Despite these challenges, the first wave pushed forward with determination. The Iron Hands smashed into the center of the traitor line, with Ferrus Manus himself dueling with Fulgrim of the Emperor's children. The Salamanders secured the western flank, their superior resilience allowing them to weather intense bombardment as they advanced methodically. On the eastern edge, the Raven Guard employed modified tactics for the unusual circumstances. Unable to rely on stealth in the open battlefield, Corax organized his forces into fast-moving assault columns supported by Whispercutter jetbikes and Darkwing gunships. These formations exploited gaps in the traitor lines, pushing deep into enemy territory to disrupt artillery positions and command nodes. For several hours, the battle progressed according to Imperial projections. The first wave suffered heavy casualties but maintained momentum, gradually forcing the traitor legions to give ground. Vox transmissions confirmed that the second wave had begun their descent, right on schedule. Victory, though costly, seemed assured. Then came the moment that would forever change the fate of the Raven Guard and the Imperium itself. As the second wave made planetfall behind the Loyalist forces, the unthinkable occurred. Instead of reinforcing their supposedly loyal brothers, the 4 legions of the second wave opened fire on the rear of the first wave formations. In an instant, the tactical situation transformed from a challenging frontal assault to a nightmarish encirclement. Corax was directing an assault on a Death Guard artillery position when the first reports reached him. The Raven Guard's rearguard, comprised primarily of reconnaissance and support units, was being systematically annihilated by Iron Warrior's heavy tanks. Similar reports flooded in from the Iron Hands and Salamanders, betrayal on an unimaginable scale. The trap had been sprung with brutal efficiency. 7 traitor legions now surrounded the 3 Loyalist legions of the first wave, catching them in a lethal crossfire. The Urgal Depression, already a challenging battleground, became a slaughterhouse. Drop sites designated for evacuation were now killing grounds controlled by the traitors, eliminating any possibility of orderly withdrawal. Amid the chaos, Corax demonstrated why he was counted among the Emperor's finest generals. Rather than attempting to hold ground against impossible odds, he immediately ordered the Raven Guard to consolidate into defensive formations focused on mobility. Abandoned vehicles became improvised barricades. Wounded Astartes were gathered at designated collection points, where apothecaries worked frantically to stabilize them for evacuation. The Primarch himself became a rallying point for his sons, his power whip carving through traitor Astartes who dared approach. When a World Eater's assault formation threatened to overrun a Raven Guard field hospital, Corax intercepted them personally. Witnesses described him as a blur of motion, his weapons leaving trails of light as he dispatched a dozen berserkers in as many seconds. As the battle deteriorated further, communication between the 3 Loyalist legions became sporadic. The last transmission from Ferrus Manus reported that he was engaging Fulgrim directly, while Vulcan's forces were being pushed back toward the center of the Depression by combined Night Lords and Alpha Legion elements. Recognizing that the battle was lost, Corax made the agonizing decision to attempt a breakout. Gathering as many of his sons as could be reached, he identified a potential weak point in the encirclement, a sector where Wordbearer's forces had overextended themselves pursuing fleeing salamanders. "We strike there," he told his remaining captains, pointing to the hololithic display, full concentration of force on a narrow front. Once breakthrough is achieved, we scatter into the highlands beyond the Depression and make our way to the emergency extraction zones. The Raven Guard breakout began with a ferocious artillery barrage from their few remaining tanks, followed immediately by massed jump pack assaults. Corax led the attack personally, his enhanced Primarch physiology allowing him to tear through traitor Astartes with terrifying efficiency. For a brief moment, it appeared the gambit might succeed, as the Wordbearer's line buckled under the concentrated assault. Then Lorgar himself appeared, accompanied by a cadre of Gal Vorbak, Wordbearers who had undergone some form of twisted transformation, that enhanced their combat abilities beyond normal Astartes limits. The clash between the two Primarchs was brief but vicious. Though Corax was the superior warrior, he was fighting to break contact rather than achieve victory, and the constant pressure from enemy forces on his flanks prevented him from pressing his advantage. When Angron of the World Eaters joined the engagement, Corax made the tactical decision to disengage. The breakout corridor was closing rapidly, and remaining to duel two Primarchs would doom his surviving sons to certain death. With a final devastating sweep of his power whip that cleared space around him, Corax disengaged and rejoined the main Raven Guard force pushing through the gap in the traitor lines. The cost of escape was staggering. Of the approximately 80,000 Raven Guard Astartes who had deployed to Istvan V, fewer than 5,000 made it through the breakout corridor. Many of these were wounded, their survival far from assured as they scattered into the rugged highlands beyond the Urgal Depression. For 3 days, the shattered remnants of the Raven Guard played a deadly game of hide and seek with traitor kill teams. Corax moved constantly, gathering survivors and directing them toward extraction points where Thunderhawk gunships, if any remained, might attempt recovery operations. His natural talents for stealth and evasion, honed during the liberation of Deliverance, proved invaluable as he personally led groups of survivors through enemy patrols. On the 4th day after the massacre, a desperate gambit was attempted. The few remaining Raven Guard officers with access to functional Vox equipment coordinated a series of diversionary attacks against traitor positions, drawing attention away from a dried riverbed that led to a plateau suitable for extraction. Corax led the largest group of survivors, approximately 3,000 Astartes, along this route, while smaller detachments created distractions across a 20-kilometer front. The extraction itself was chaotic and incomplete. A handful of Raven Guard pilots had managed to preserve their aircraft by hiding them in mountain caves following the initial betrayal. These brave pilots now conducted repeated runs into the extraction zone, each gunship crammed far beyond normal capacity with wounded Astartes. Enemy fire was constant, with several Thunderhawks shot down during takeoff or landing. Corax was among the last to leave the surface, ensuring that as many of his sons as possible were evacuated before he would consider his own departure. As traitor forces closed in on the extraction zone from multiple directions, he held the perimeter with a dwindling group of veterans, many fighting despite grievous injuries. Only when the last functional Thunderhawk was loaded did he finally board, the gunship lifting off under heavy fire with its hull already compromised in multiple locations. The remnants of the Raven Guard fleet in orbit had been similarly devastated. Of the substantial flotilla that had arrived at Istvan V, only a handful of capital ships remained operational, having withdrawn to the system's edge when the betrayal became apparent. These vessels now conducted high-risk recovery operations, dropping briefly out of the warp to recover Thunderhawks before disappearing again to avoid the much larger traitor fleet. When the final tally was made during the long, somber journey back to Imperial space, the full extent of the devastation became clear. The Raven Guard Legion had been reduced to approximately 4,000 battle-worthy Astartes, less than 5% of their original strength. Worse still, the casualties had fallen disproportionately on veteran officers and specialized units. The Talon, Blackguard, and Shadow companies, elite formations that had formed the Legion's backbone, were essentially wiped out. The strategic consequences of the Drop Site Massacre extended far beyond the devastating personnel losses. The Raven Guard's entire command structure had to be rebuilt from the few surviving officers. Equipment losses were similarly catastrophic, with the Legion's stockpiles of specialized wargear, vehicles, and ships largely destroyed or captured by the traitors. Perhaps most significantly, the nature of the Raven Guard's operations would be fundamentally altered by their reduced numbers. No longer could they conduct widespread infiltration campaigns across multiple systems simultaneously. Each surviving Astartes now represented an irreplaceable strategic asset that had to be deployed with utmost care. Corax, ever adaptive, began reformulating Legion doctrine during the return journey to Loyalist space. The Raven Guard would lean even more heavily into their stealth and precision strike capabilities, abandoning any pretense of conventional engagement. Small kill teams would become their standard operational unit, striking critical targets and vanishing before enemy forces could respond. As the battered fleet limped toward deliverance, Corax spent long hours in his private chambers, analyzing what had transpired at Istvan V and planning his legion's path forward. The betrayal had cut deeply, but the Primarch's resolve remained unbroken. The Raven Guard had been forged in the crucible of oppression on Lycius, and they would survive this latest trial as they had survived before, through resilience, adaptation, and an unwavering commitment to victory no matter the odds. The battered Raven Guard fleet emerged from the warp in the Kievar system, their ships bearing the scars of desperate escape. As the vessels approached deliverance, the moon's defense platforms held fire, their auger arrays recognizing the transponder codes of friendly vessels despite their damaged condition. Corax stood on the bridge of the shadow of the Emperor, his pale features drawn with exhaustion and grief as he gazed upon his homeworld. The Drop Site Massacre had reduced his once proud legion to a shadow of its former self, but now came the task of rebuilding from the ashes. When Corax set foot on deliverance for the first time since departing for Istvan, he was met not with ceremonial honor guards, but with stunned silence from the fortress monastery staff. The sight of their Primarch leading a procession of wounded, battered warriors told the story more effectively than any official communication could have. The Raven Guard had gone to Istvan V nearly 80,000 strong. They returned barely 4,000. Corax wasted no time on ceremony or mourning. Within hours of planetfall, he convened the surviving officers in the Raven Spire's central stratageum. The chamber, designed to accommodate hundreds of commanders, now contained fewer than 30. Among them were Commander Bran Nev, who had remained on deliverance with the recruitment garrison, Chief Apothecary Vicent VI, one of the few senior specialists to survive the massacre, and newly promoted Shadow Captain Kayvon Shrike, whose leadership during the extraction had saved hundreds of lives. The reorganization of the severely depleted legion began immediately. Traditional company structures were abandoned as impractical. There simply weren't enough Astartes to maintain them. Instead, Corax implemented a more fluid organizational system based around small, autonomous strike forces. Each was led by a shadow captain and comprised of warriors with complementary specializations. These units could operate independently for extended periods, conducting targeted operations without requiring the support infrastructure of a full company. Equipment and materiel presented another significant challenge. The Raven Guard had lost most of their armory on Istvan V, including irreplaceable relics and specialized wargear. Corax directed the Legion's remaining tech marines to prioritize the repair and redistribution of salvageable equipment. Power armor became a precious resource, with functional components harvested from damaged suits to keep others operational. The few remaining vehicles were maintained in a constant state of readiness, deployed only when absolutely necessary. Recruitment took on new urgency. The traditional sources, the prison populations of Deliverance and the hive cities of Kievar, could not produce Astartes quickly enough to replenish the Legion's numbers. Corax expanded the recruitment net, dispatching small teams to evaluate potential candidates from nearby compliant worlds. The screening process became more rigorous than ever, focusing on qualities that aligned with the Legion's new operational reality: independence, resourcefulness, and psychological resilience. Even as he rebuilt his shattered legion, Corax turned his attention to the wider conflict. The Drop Site Massacre had revealed the true extent of Horus's treachery, 4 legions openly supporting his rebellion, with 4 more revealed as traitors at Istvan. The balance of power had shifted dramatically, with loyal forces now potentially outnumbered. Conventional military logic would dictate consolidation and defensive operations until reinforcements could be mustered. Corax rejected this approach entirely. The Raven Guard would not hide while traitors ravaged the Imperium. Instead, they would strike back in the manner they knew best, from the shadows, targeting vulnerable points in the enemy's rear areas and supply lines. These operations would serve multiple purposes: gathering intelligence on traitor movements, disrupting their logistics, and demonstrating that the loyal legions remained a threat despite Istvan. The first of these counter-strikes came 3 months after the Drop Site Massacre. Intelligence reports indicated that the Iron Warriors had established a forward supply depot in the Sarsana system to support their push toward Terra. A strike force of 200 Raven Guard infiltrated the system aboard a captured merchant vessel, bypassing the orbital defenses through a combination of falsified credentials and passive stealth systems. The raid was executed with surgical precision. Jump pack-equipped assault teams disabled the depot's communications, while infiltration squads planted melta charges at structural weak points. The Iron Warriors garrison, comprising primarily mortal troops with Astartes officers, was systematically eliminated by sniper teams positioned on surrounding ridgelines. Within 6 hours, the depot was destroyed, its supplies either confiscated or rendered unusable. The Raven Guard withdrew without a single casualty, leaving behind only a single Raven insignia carved into a rock face overlooking the smoldering ruins. Similar operations followed across multiple sectors. A Word-Bearer's recruitment facility on Calcus Prime was infiltrated and its gene-seed stocks destroyed. A Night Lord's torture complex on Nostromo Quintus was liberated, its prisoners extracted, and its facilities demolished. Each strike was calculated to maximize damage while minimizing risk to the irreplaceable Raven Guard warriors. These guerrilla operations, while effective, could not address the fundamental problem facing the Legion, their severely limited numbers. Even with accelerated recruitment and training, it would take decades to rebuild the Raven Guard to even half of their pre-Istvan strength. Corax, ever the pragmatist, began exploring more radical solutions. Reports had reached deliverance of a secret project on Terra, the Emperor's work on the original Primarch project. If Corax could gain access to this knowledge, he reasoned, it might be possible to enhance the Legion's recruitment process and accelerate the creation of new Astartes. The plan was audacious and fraught with risk, but the alternative was the slow extinction of his Legion while the galaxy burned. The mission to Terra was planned with characteristic thoroughness. Corax would lead a small team aboard the Avenger, one of the few Raven Guard strike cruisers to survive Istvan. The vessel's profile was modified to reduce its warp signature, and its identification codes were altered to match those of a supply ship from the Saturnine fleet. The journey would be perilous. Warp storms had intensified throughout the galaxy, making navigation treacherous even for experienced navigators. Despite these challenges, the Avenger reached the Sol system undetected. Using stealth protocols developed during the liberation of Deliverance, the ship slipped past the outer system defenses and established orbit around Luna, where it remained powered down to avoid detection, while Corax and his team made the final approach to Terra aboard a modified Thunderhawk. The Imperial Palace was the most heavily defended structure in the galaxy, its defenses being strengthened daily as news of Horus's approach spread. Yet these defenses were designed to repel external attacks, not to detect a Primarch who had mastered the art of moving unseen. Corax utilized his unique abilities to bypass security systems and avoid patrols, leading his small team through service tunnels and maintenance shafts toward the Emperor's laboratories deep beneath the palace. The laboratories themselves presented a greater challenge. Here, the most sensitive research of the Great Crusade had been conducted, protected by technologies and psychic wards beyond the understanding of even most Astartes. Corax's gene connection to the Emperor proved crucial, allowing him to navigate these defenses where others would have been detected and destroyed. Within the laboratories, Corax discovered comprehensive records of the Primarch project, the genetic templates, the modification processes, and the specialized techniques used to accelerate maturation. Most critically, he found data on the creation of the gene seed that transformed ordinary humans into space marines. This information, properly applied, could potentially allow the Raven Guard to create new Astartes more quickly and efficiently than the standard methods. The extraction was as silent as the infiltration. Corax and his team departed Terra with the precious data, leaving no evidence of their presence. The return journey to Deliverance was complicated by increasing warp turbulence, but the Avenger's modified Geller field held firm, delivering the Primarch and his genetic prize safely back to Raven Guard territory. Upon his return, Corax immediately assembled the Legion's apothecaries and tech marines to implement the new knowledge. Chief Apothecary Vicent VI was placed in charge of what became known as the Raptor Project, an attempt to create enhanced Astartes using the Emperor's original techniques. A secure facility was established in the deepest levels of the Ravenspire, accessible only to those directly involved in the work. The initial results were promising. Using the Emperor's methods, combined with genetic material from Corax himself, the apothecaries created a modified gene seed that accelerated the transformation process. The first test subjects, recruits drawn from Deliverance's population, showed remarkable development, reaching combat readiness in a fraction of the usual time. Their physical capabilities exceeded those of standard Astartes, with enhanced strength, speed, and sensory acuity. As the Raptor project progressed, however, concerning signs emerged. Some subjects developed unexpected mutations, minor at first, such as hyperpigmentation or slightly elongated digits. The apothecaries adjusted the procedures, attempting to stabilize the gene seed, but the modifications had unexpected consequences. Later test groups exhibited more severe abnormalities, including asymmetrical bone growth and neurological complications. Despite these setbacks, the strategic situation demanded that the project continue. The Raven Guard remained dangerously undermanned, and intelligence reports indicated that Horus's forces were advancing across multiple sectors. Corax authorized further refinements to the process, hoping that the apothecaries could resolve the stability issues before full-scale implementation became necessary. While the Raptor project developed in secret, the surviving Raven Guard continued their guerrilla campaign against traitor forces. These operations took on increased significance as more than mere military actions. They became crucial for the Legion's psychological recovery. Each successful strike reinforced that the Raven Guard remained effective despite their losses, that their combat doctrine retained its validity even against fellow Astartes. The psychological impact of near extinction profoundly affected the Legion's collective mindset. The survivors of Istvan V carried deep trauma, manifesting in various ways. Some became excessively cautious, reluctant to commit to engagements without exhaustive planning. Others developed a fatalistic aggression, taking risks that bordered on suicidal. Corax recognized these patterns and worked to channel them productively, emphasizing that survival was not merely about preserving lives, but about maintaining the Legion's ability to contribute meaningfully to the war effort. This psychological transformation extended to the Legion's combat doctrine. Pre-Istvan, the Raven Guard had employed stealth and precision as tactical preferences. Post-Istvan, these approaches became existential necessities. Every engagement was evaluated through the lens of resource conservation, not just equipment and ammunition, but the irreplaceable lives of veteran Astartes. Operations that could not guarantee favorable casualty ratios were rejected regardless of their strategic value. The Legion's relationship with death itself evolved. Raven Guard had always honored their fallen, but now each death carried greater weight. Funeral rites became more elaborate, with fallen warriors' names inscribed on the walls of the Ravenspire's Memorial Hall. Their equipment was carefully preserved, either for practical reuse or as relics to inspire future generations. This reverence for the dead extended to battlefield behavior. Raven Guard would take extraordinary risks to recover the bodies and gene seed of fallen brothers, ensuring that nothing of their sacrifice was wasted. As the heresy progressed, the Raven Guard's operations expanded beyond simple hit-and-run attacks. Using intelligence gathered during their raids, they began targeting specific traitor supply lines and communication networks. These operations, while small in scale, had disproportionate effects on enemy capabilities. A word-bearer's expeditionary force bound for Calth found itself stranded without fuel when their supply convoy was intercepted by Raven Guard strike teams. An Alpha Legion command post lost contact with its field units after Raven Guard infiltrators replaced their astropathic choir with loyalist counterparts. Throughout this period, Corax maintained a delicate balance between aggression and preservation. Each operation was meticulously planned to maximize impact while minimizing exposure. The Primarch personally led the most critical missions, his unique abilities often proving decisive in situations where even veteran Astartes might fail. Between operations, he divided his time between overseeing the Raptor project, coordinating with other loyal forces, and guiding the continued reorganization of his legion. The transformation of the Raven Guard during this period was remarkable. From the brink of extinction, they evolved into perhaps the most efficient guerrilla force in Imperial history. Their tactics, born of necessity rather than preference, would influence Legion doctrine for millennia to come. More importantly, they demonstrated that even at their lowest point, the Sons of Corax remained a force that could strike fear into the hearts of traitors, emerging from the shadows when least expected to exact vengeance for deliverance and for the Imperium. In the aftermath of the Drop Site Massacre, the Raven Spire on Deliverance became a place of desperate innovation. Corax, having returned from Terra with the Emperor's genetic knowledge, immediately established a secure facility in the deepest recesses of the fortress monastery. This sanctum, accessible only through biometrically sealed bulkheads and guarded by the most trusted veterans of the Legion, would house what became known as the Raptor Project. Chief Apothecary Vicent VI oversaw the daily operations, his expertise in gene manipulation making him the natural choice to lead this unprecedented endeavor. The laboratory was equipped with technology recovered from the Emperor's own facilities, gene sequencers, maturation tanks, and arcane devices, whose functions were understood by only a handful of individuals in the Imperium. The air hummed with the sound of filtration systems and monitoring equipment, while the blue glow of stasis fields cast everything in a ghostly light. The genetic material that formed the foundation of the project came from multiple sources. Most crucial was a sample of Corax's own genetic template, pure and undiluted Primarch gene code that had never before been made available to a Legion's apothecaries. This was supplemented with preserved gene seed from fallen Raven Guard warriors and fresh samples from survivors of Istvan V. The combination would theoretically allow for the creation of enhanced Astartes who possessed capabilities beyond those of standard Space Marines, while still maintaining the specific traits of the Raven Guard. Initial progress exceeded even Corax's ambitious expectations. The first test subjects, recruits selected from Deliverance's population for their genetic compatibility, showed remarkable development. Where traditional implantation procedures required years of careful monitoring and gradual enhancement, the new process achieved similar results in months. The subject's muscle density increased by approximately 40% beyond standard Astartes norms. Their reaction times decreased to less than half that of veteran Space Marines. Most notably, they displayed heightened abilities in areas typically associated with Raven Guard genetic traits, improved night vision, reduced metabolic signatures, and enhanced stealth capabilities. Corax named these first successful subjects Raptors, both for their predatory efficiency and as a reclamation of the term once used informally for the 19th Legion before his discovery. The name carried symbolic weight. These warriors would be the talons of the Raven Lord, striking precisely at the heart of the enemy. The initial cadre of 20 Raptors began training immediately, their accelerated physical development matched by intensive combat conditioning. Shadow Captain Agapito, one of the few veteran officers to survive Istvan, developed specialized training protocols that emphasized their enhanced capabilities. The Raptors learned to operate in absolute darkness, to move without creating detectable sound patterns, and to strike with such speed that even augmented enemies would have no time to react. These early successes prompted an expansion of the project. Additional recruitment drives were conducted across Deliverance and Kievar, identifying candidates with optimal genetic markers. The facility was enlarged, with additional maturation chambers constructed to accommodate more subjects. The apothecaries worked in shifts, monitoring the transformation process around the clock. The first indications of trouble appeared approximately 4 months into the expanded program. Subject 37 developed unusual skin pigmentation during the late stages of transformation, patches of deathly pallor interspersed with areas of dark, almost black coloration. The apothecaries initially classified this as a cosmetic anomaly of no functional significance. Within days, however, more concerning symptoms emerged. The subject's bone structure began to alter, with asymmetrical growth causing visible deformities in the limbs and torso. Vicent 6 immediately isolated the affected subject and adjusted the genetic protocols for subsequent batches. The modifications appeared successful, with the next 20 subjects showing no visible abnormalities. The apothecaries maintained enhanced monitoring, but cautiously proceeded with the program. The apparent resolution was short-lived. During combat exercises, 3 members of the 2nd Raptor cadre suddenly collapsed, their enhanced physiology seemingly turning against them as muscle tissue began to break down and reform in unpredictable patterns. Medical intervention stabilized their condition, but they remain non-functional as warriors, their once perfect forms now twisted into configurations that could not properly operate power armor. Corax personally reviewed all data from the project, spending days without rest analyzing genetic sequences and transformation protocols. His conclusion was troubling. Something was interfering with the pure gene template, introducing instabilities that manifested unpredictably. The Primarch ordered a temporary halt to new implementations, while the existing protocols underwent thorough review. This pause coincided with concerning developments in the wider war. Intelligence reports indicated increased traitor fleet movements in neighboring sectors, suggesting that Horus's forces might have become aware of the Raven Guard's survival and rebuilding efforts. The strategic necessity of accelerated recruitment took on new urgency, pushing Corax to authorize continued development of the Raptor project despite the unresolved issues. The third wave of implementations incorporated additional safeguards, more frequent monitoring, adjusted nutrient formulations, and modified genetic stabilizers derived from Terran technologies. For several weeks, these measures appeared effective. The new Raptors displayed the desired enhancements without visible mutation, and their performance in training exercises exceeded even the successful first batch. Then came the incident that would be recorded in the Legion's sealed archives as Collapse Day. During a coordinated training exercise involving 30 Raptors from multiple implementation batches, a cascade failure occurred. It began with a single warrior whose enhanced musculature suddenly began to distort, bones breaking and reforming in real time as he screamed in agony. Within minutes, the effect spread to others, apparently triggered by some form of stress response. Of the 30 participants, 23 suffered catastrophic physiological breakdown. The scene in the training chamber was nightmarish. Warriors who moments before had embodied the peak of transhuman potential now writhed on the deck, their bodies twisting into impossible configurations. Some developed elongated limbs with multiple redundant joints. Others experienced accelerated and uncontrolled bone growth, with spurs erupting through skin and armor. Most disturbing were those whose facial features rearranged, leaving them with misplaced sensory organs and malformed vocal structures that produced only inhuman sounds. Corax arrived at the chamber minutes after the first reports, only to find his enhanced sons transformed into monstrosities. The Primarch's reaction was recorded by monitoring systems, a rare display of open emotion as he knelt beside one of the afflicted, attempting to comfort the warrior even as the Raptor's body continued its horrific transformation. In the aftermath, Vicent 6 conducted comprehensive autopsies on those who had not survived the mutations. His findings pointed to a fundamental instability in the accelerated gene seed, not a flaw in the Emperor's original work, but something that appeared to have been introduced during the implementation process. The genetic material was responding to some external influence, though the nature of this corruption remained elusive. Corax ordered a complete security review of the facility. Access logs were examined, materials tested for contamination, and all personnel questioned regarding potential breaches. The investigation revealed nothing obvious, yet the evidence of tampering was undeniable. The Primarch expanded the security perimeter and implemented additional verification protocols, determined to identify and eliminate the source of corruption. Despite these setbacks, strategic necessity demanded that the project continue. The Raven Guard remained dangerously undermanned, and conventional recruitment could not produce battle-ready Astartes quickly enough to meet the Legion's needs. Corax authorized a fourth implementation wave, incorporating additional genetic stabilizers and enhanced monitoring systems. The subjects were kept in isolated chambers, with no contact between individuals to prevent any potential cascade effects. This batch produced the most disturbing results yet. The mutations appeared earlier in the process and proved more extreme. Some subjects developed chitinous growths that resembled insectoid exoskeletons. Others manifested multiple redundant organs that functioned with disturbing efficiency despite their non-human configuration. Most concerning were the neurological effects, subjects displaying heightened aggression, diminished cognitive function, and in some cases, apparent psychic manifestations that had never been part of the Raven Guard genetic profile. The truth was finally discovered through a seemingly unrelated security operation. A Raven Guard infiltration team, returning from a mission against Alpha Legion forces, brought with them captured enemy communication logs. Among these was a coded message referring to Project Vindicate, an Alpha Legion operation targeting the Raven Guard. Further decryption revealed the horrifying reality. The Alpha Legion had infiltrated Deliverance months earlier, inserting operatives so deeply embedded that they had gained access to the Raptor project itself. The method of sabotage became clear upon further investigation. The gene templates brought from Terra had been subtly contaminated with demonic agents, microscopic entities that remained dormant until activated by the transformation process. These agents introduced chaos-influenced mutations into the pure gene seed, creating warriors who were not merely physically unstable, but potentially corrupted on a spiritual level. Corax's reaction to this discovery was cold fury. The security protocols of the Ravenspire were completely overhauled, with every individual subjected to enhanced screening procedures developed specifically to identify Alpha Legion infiltrators. Several suspects were identified and interrogated, revealing the extent of the operation. The Alpha Legion had been present since shortly after the Raven Guard's return from Istvan, patiently executing a plan to corrupt the Legion's rebuilding efforts from within. With the source of contamination identified, Vicent 6 attempted to develop countermeasures. The existing raptors who had not yet manifested severe mutations were placed in stasis, while the apothecaries worked to stabilize their condition. New genetic screening procedures were implemented to identify and neutralize the demonic contaminants. For a brief period, it appeared that the project might be salvageable. This hope proved short-lived. The demonic agents had integrated too thoroughly with the modified gene seed, making separation impossible without destroying the enhancements that were the project's purpose. More disturbingly, the corruption appeared to be spreading through some unknown vector, affecting even subjects who had been implemented before the sabotage was discovered. Corax faced the most difficult decision of his leadership. The Raptor project represented the Raven Guard's best hope for rapid rebuilding, yet continuing risked creating not loyal warriors, but monsters that might ultimately serve the very forces they were created to fight. After consultation with his senior officers and apothecaries, the Primarch made his choice. The project would be terminated, and measures taken to address the existing subjects. For those raptors whose mutations had progressed beyond recovery, Corax personally administered the Emperor's peace. The Primarch visited each chamber individually, speaking privately with the afflicted warriors before ending their suffering with a swift, merciful stroke. These interactions were not recorded, but those who stood guard outside reported that Corax emerged from each chamber more heavily burdened, his normally stoic features marked by profound grief. A smaller group of raptors, primarily from the first implementation wave, remained stable enough for battlefield deployment, though they required regular medical intervention to manage their condition. These warriors were formed into specialized infiltration units, their mutations concealed beneath modified armor. They would serve with distinction in subsequent campaigns, their enhanced capabilities proving valuable in specific operations, though their existence remained a closely guarded secret within the Legion. The most problematic cases were those whose mutations had created something neither fully human nor cleanly transhuman, but twisted by clear chaotic influence. These unfortunates, approximately 60 in total, could not be safely deployed, yet could not be simply executed like rabid animals. Corax ordered the construction of a specialized containment facility deep beneath the Ravenspire, where these failed raptors would be maintained in stasis, while the apothecaries continued to search for some means of reversing their condition. The psychological impact of the Raptor project's failure weighed heavily on the Raven Guard. For Vicent VI and his apothecaries, it represented not merely a scientific setback, but a moral catastrophe. Their attempts to save the Legion had created suffering for the very warriors they had sworn to heal and enhance. Many requested reassignment to frontline combat duties, preferring to face death cleanly rather than continue work that had produced such horrors. For Corax, the failure struck at his core identity as the Primarch of Liberation. He had sought to free his Legion from the constraints of conventional recruitment, only to lead them into a different form of bondage. In private communications with trusted officers, he expressed profound regret for authorizing the project despite early warning signs, acknowledging that his desperation had clouded his judgment. The operational impact was equally significant. Without the accelerated recruitment the Raptor project promised, the Raven Guard faced the reality of remaining severely undermanned for the foreseeable future. Corax adjusted Legion strategy accordingly, focusing even more intensely on high-impact operations that maximized the effectiveness of limited personnel. Strike teams became smaller, missions more precisely targeted, and risk assessment more conservative. In the wider context of the heresy, the Raptor project represented something beyond a tactical setback. It demonstrated the insidious methods employed by the traitor forces, not merely direct military confrontation, but subtle corruption that turned the Loyalists' own efforts against them. The Alpha Legion's infiltration of Deliverance and contamination of the Gene Project revealed a level of strategic sophistication that would characterize much of the Shadow War fought alongside the more visible campaigns. The Raven Guard's desperate situation following the Drop Site Massacre and the catastrophic failure of the Raptor project demanded a complete strategic reassessment. With conventional approaches to Legion warfare now impossible due to their severely depleted numbers, Corax turned to the tactics that had served him well during the liberation of Deliverance: asymmetric warfare, targeted strikes, and the strategic application of terror against enemy command structures. The first phase of what would become known as the Shadow War began approximately 7 months after Istvan V. Intelligence gathered by surviving Raven Guard scout units indicated that the traitor legions had dispersed across multiple sectors, spreading their forces to secure key worlds and resources. This dispersion created vulnerabilities that a conventional force could not exploit, but the shattered Raven Guard were no longer conventional. Corax divided his remaining warriors into operational cells of between 5 and 20 Astartes, each assigned specific target areas and broad strategic objectives rather than explicit missions. This approach, radical by Astartes standards, granted unprecedented autonomy to field commanders while maintaining strategic cohesion through periodic encrypted communications. The Primarch himself led the most critical operations, his unique abilities making him particularly effective in situations requiring infiltration of heavily defended enemy positions. The Battle of Ravendelve marked the first major engagement of this new approach. Ravendelve was an asteroid mining complex in the Sarsana system that had been converted by the Iron Warriors into a forward supply depot. Intelligence suggested that the facility contained significant stockpiles of munitions and void ship components intended to support the traitor advance toward the Segmentum Solar. More importantly, the depot's security was primarily provided by mortal troops, with only a small detachment of Iron Warriors Astartes for command and oversight. Shadow Captain Aloni Tev led the operation with a force of 40 Raven Guard divided into 8 5-man teams. The infiltration phase utilized a captured civilian transport, its identification codes and crew replaced by Raven Guard operatives. The vessel approached Ravendelve under the pretense of delivering processed ore, a common enough occurrence that it raised no immediate suspicion among the depot's defensive systems. Once docked, the infiltration teams dispersed throughout the facility according to pre-assigned objectives. 2 teams targeted the communications array, ensuring that no distress signals could be transmitted. 3 teams positioned themselves to neutralize the Iron Warriors Astartes, using specially modified sniper rifles loaded with Kraken penetrator rounds, capable of piercing Astartes' armor at optimal angles. The remaining teams placed melta charges at structural weak points, identified through careful analysis of the facility's construction. The operation's execution phase was precisely coordinated. At exactly 27 hours after infiltration, all teams activated their objectives simultaneously. The communications array exploded in a shower of sparks and debris. 6 of the 8 Iron Warriors Astartes died in the first 19 seconds, killed by headshots before they could respond. The remaining 2 were eliminated during the subsequent confusion. The melta charges detonated in sequence, causing catastrophic structural failures that propagated throughout the facility. The human garrison, suddenly leaderless and facing a facility in the process of decompression, responded with predictable panic. Many were killed by the Raven Guard teams as they attempted to reach escape pods. Others died when emergency bulkheads sealed, trapping them in sections exposed to vacuum. A small percentage escaped to carry word of what had happened, exactly as Corax had intended. The psychological impact of the attack would force the traitors to divert resources to securing their supply lines, creating inefficiencies in their logistics network. The Raven Delve operation established the template for subsequent Shadow War actions. Raven Guard strike teams would identify vulnerabilities in traitor infrastructure, infiltrate using a variety of deceptive approaches, and execute precisely timed attacks designed to cause maximum disruption with minimal engagement. The focus remained on targets of strategic value, command centers, supply depots, communication hubs, and specialized facilities like Mechanicum forges or Medicae installations. The most sophisticated of these operations targeted the word-bearers during the Theronian campaign. Theron was a heavily populated hive world that had declared for Horus early in the heresy. The word-bearers had established a significant presence on the planet, using it as a base for both military operations and their spreading corruption. Intelligence indicated that Erebus himself was present, overseeing the construction of what appeared to be ritual sites throughout the primary hive city. Rather than attempting a direct assault on a heavily defended world, Corax developed a multi-phase operation designed to destabilize the word-bearers' control and potentially eliminate high-value targets. The first phase involved inserting small infiltration teams disguised as civilian refugees. These teams, comprising no more than 2 Astartes each, established safe houses and observation posts throughout the hive city, building a comprehensive intelligence picture over several weeks. The second phase introduced specialized operatives from the Mordathan, the Shadow Masters. These warriors represented a unique subgroup within the Raven Guard, comprising Astartes who had inherited a rare genetic quirk from Corax's gene seed that allowed them to become virtually invisible by manipulating light and shadow around them. This ability was distinct from conventional stealth techniques or technology, making the Mordathan particularly effective against enemies with enhanced sensory capabilities. The Mordathan teams on Thuron focused on eliminating key word-bearers personnel, not the highest-ranking officers who would be well protected, but mid-level commanders whose absence would create confusion in the chain of command. Each assassination was conducted with distinctive methodology, creating the impression of widespread insurgent activity rather than a coordinated Astartes operation. Some targets were found with precision bolt rounds through their skulls. Others disappeared entirely, their fate unknown to their comrades. Most effective were those killed, with ritual implements taken from the very ceremonial sites they had been constructing, their bodies arranged in mockeries of word-bearer devotional poses. These targeted killings created precisely the effect Corax had anticipated. The word-bearers responded by implementing increasingly draconian security measures that alienated the civilian population. Curfews were imposed. Habitation blocks were subjected to random searches. Public executions became common. The deteriorating relationship between occupiers and civilians created opportunities for the third phase of the operation, active insurgency. Raven Guard operatives began providing training and equipment to selected civilian resistance groups. These were not random malcontents, but individuals carefully chosen for their influence, capability, and psychological profiles, indicating resilience and discretion. The Astartes taught basic sabotage techniques, improvised weapons manufacturing, and secure communication methods. More importantly, they provided strategic direction, ensuring that civilian actions complemented the overall operation rather than devolving into unfocused violence. The cumulative effect of these activities forced Erebus to divert increasing resources to internal security, weakening the Word-Bearer's position in neighboring systems. Plans for offensive operations were delayed as troops intended for deployment elsewhere were retained to maintain control of Thuron. The ritual sites, whatever their intended purpose, remained uncompleted, as work crews were repeatedly targeted by snipers or sabotage. The operation culminated in an attempt to eliminate Erebus himself during a rare public appearance. A combined team of Mordathan and regular Raven Guard infiltrated the ceremonial precinct where Erebus was scheduled to address gathered cultists. The assassination team deployed specialized ammunition developed specifically for high-value targets, rounds containing microscopic fragments of psycho-reactive material that could disrupt the warp-based protections many traitor commanders had begun employing. The attempt came within seconds of success. The primary shooter, a Mordathan named Nikona Sharokin, placed 2 rounds directly through Erebus's skull. However, the Word-Bearer had taken precautions beyond what intelligence had indicated. Some form of warp-based contingency activated upon his apparent death, enveloping him in coruscating energy that appeared to reconstitute his physical form. In the ensuing chaos, the Raven Guard teams were forced to withdraw, though they inflicted significant casualties on Erebus's honor guard during their extraction. While the Thuronian campaign did not achieve its ultimate objective of eliminating Erebus, it succeeded in disrupting Word-Bearer operations throughout the sector for several months. More significantly, it demonstrated the effectiveness of the Raven Guard's new approach to warfare, patient, multi-layered operations that leveraged limited personnel to achieve strategic effects far beyond what their numbers would suggest possible. The Mordathan proved so effective during this period that Corax expanded their role beyond assassination to include specialized reconnaissance and sabotage missions. Their unique abilities made them particularly valuable for operations against traitor Astartes, whose enhanced senses could detect conventional stealth approaches. The Shadow Masters operated in cells of 3 to 5 warriors, each cell maintaining its own operational security to the extent that different groups were often unaware of each other's activities, even when deployed to the same theater. One of the most successful Mordathan operations targeted the Alpha Legion on Carpinus Prime. Intelligence had identified the planet as a coordination hub for Alpha Legion activities throughout the subsector, though the exact location and nature of their command center remained unknown. 3 Mordathan cells were inserted on Carpinus, each unaware of the other's presence to guard against the possibility of captured operatives, revealing the full scope of the mission. Over 6 weeks, the Mordathan conducted passive surveillance, gradually building a pattern of Alpha Legion movements throughout the primary settlement. The breakthrough came when one cell observed unusual power consumption patterns in what appeared to be an abandoned manufacturing complex. Closer investigation revealed sophisticated security systems inconsistent with the facility's apparent disuse. Rather than attempting to breach the complex directly, the Mordathan employed a strategy of strategic compromise. They allowed themselves to be detected, but not identified, by perimeter security, creating the impression of local insurgents conducting reconnaissance. This prompted the Alpha Legion to relocate sensitive operations to a secondary site, which had already been identified and placed under surveillance by another Mordathan cell. When the transfer of equipment and personnel began, the Raven Guard struck. Precision melta charges breached the convoy's armor at exactly the point where it passed through a narrow ravine outside the settlement. Specialized toxin bombs designed to penetrate Astartes' respiratory filters were deployed in the initial confusion. The surviving Alpha Legion Astartes found themselves engaged by enemies they could not see, as the Mordathan utilized their natural camouflage abilities to strike from multiple angles while remaining virtually invisible. The operation yielded critical intelligence, data slates containing communication protocols, deployment schedules, and most valuably, information on Alpha Legion operatives embedded within Loyalist structures. This intelligence was transmitted directly to Terra via specialized astropathic channels, allowing Imperial authorities to neutralize potential saboteurs before they could activate. The Shadow War extended beyond military targets to include political and logistical objectives. On worlds where loyalty to the Imperium wavered, Raven Guard operatives worked to strengthen Loyalist factions through targeted elimination of traitor sympathizers, strategic information leaks, and occasionally direct intervention in political processes. These activities rarely involved direct combat, but required sophisticated understanding of social dynamics and power structures, skills that had been central to Corax's approach since his days leading the rebellion on Deliverance. The cumulative effect of these operations was difficult to quantify by conventional military metrics. The Raven Guard did not seize and hold territory. They did not engage in fleet actions or large-scale planetary assaults. What they did accomplish was a persistent degradation of traitor capabilities across multiple sectors, forcing Horus's forces to divert resources to security and counterintelligence that might otherwise have been directed toward offensive operations. This approach was not without costs. The dispersed nature of Shadow War operations meant that Raven Guard teams occasionally found themselves isolated and overwhelmed when operations went awry. The Legion's already depleted numbers continued to dwindle, with each loss representing not merely a fallen warrior, but the loss of irreplaceable experience and specialized training. Corax maintained meticulous records of these casualties, personally recording each name in a leather-bound tome that he kept in his private chambers aboard the Shadow of the Emperor. The psychological toll on the Legion was equally significant. Raven Guard Astartes spent extended periods operating behind enemy lines, often with minimal support and no prospect of extraction if discovered. The constant vigilance required for such operations, combined with the knowledge that the Legion lacked the numbers for conventional warfare, created unique psychological pressures. Some warriors developed a fatalistic outlook, viewing themselves as already dead and merely waiting for the circumstance of their ending to reveal itself. Others embraced a cold pragmatism that bordered on nihilism, measuring their worth solely by the damage they inflicted on the enemy. Corax recognized these psychological challenges and implemented measures to address them. Rotation policies ensured that teams were periodically withdrawn from frontline operations for recovery periods on Deliverance. Chaplains received specialized training in addressing the unique stresses of asymmetric warfare. Perhaps most importantly, Corax maintained personal connection with his warriors, regularly participating in operations alongside Line Astartes rather than directing exclusively from command positions. As the heresy progressed, the Shadow War evolved in response to changing strategic conditions. When traitor forces began employing psychers more extensively to detect infiltration, the Raven Guard developed countermeasures, including specialized dampening fields and targeted elimination of enemy psychic assets. When the Alpha Legion adapted to Raven Guard infiltration techniques, Corax implemented increasingly complex operational security measures, including false flag operations designed to create confusion about which actions were genuinely the work of the 19th Legion. The Shadow War represented more than merely a tactical adaptation to the Raven Guard's reduced numbers. It established a template for asymmetric warfare that would influence Imperial military doctrine for millennia to come. The techniques developed during this period would later be adopted by various Imperial organizations, including the Officio Assassinorum, the Inquisition, and even other Astartes chapters facing similar circumstances of numerical disadvantage against overwhelming enemies. The scars of the Horus Heresy ran deep within the Raven Guard. As the dust settled across a wounded Imperium, Corvus Corax found himself leading a legion that existed as merely a shadow of its former strength. The Scouring, the great counter-offensive to reclaim worlds that had fallen to Horus, demanded the participation of all loyal legions, regardless of their condition. For the Raven Guard, this meant continuing their shadow war tactics on a broader scale, striking at isolated traitor strongholds and eliminating remnants of the shattered traitor forces. Corax led his warriors with cold fury during these campaigns. The methodical precision that had characterized his leadership before Istvan was now tinged with something darker, a burning need to punish those who had betrayed the Emperor. During the liberation of Caria, Corax personally infiltrated the palace of the planetary governor, who had aligned with Horus, emerging hours later with the man's head. On Arachnos Prime, he led a strike force that eliminated an entire Alpha Legion cell that had embedded itself within the planetary defense force, leaving their bodies displayed in the central plaza as a warning to other traitor sympathizers. These actions, while effective, concerned some of his captains. The Primarch's pursuit of vengeance, while understandable, sometimes bordered on obsession. Shadow Captain Bran, one of the few senior officers to survive the heresy, once found Corax in his private chambers aboard the Shadow of the Emperor, surrounded by intelligence reports on word-bearers' movements. The Primarch had not rested for 7 days, driven by information suggesting Lorgar might be vulnerable to a precision strike. The most significant campaign of the Scouring for the Raven Guard came at Constanix II. Intelligence indicated that a substantial word-bearers force had established a fortified position on the planet, led by a senior commander named Apostle Kurtha said. More troubling were reports of massive ritual sites and strange warp disturbances emanating from the primary settlement. Corax committed nearly 3,000 Astartes to the operation, almost the entirety of his remaining legion. The battle for Constanix II demonstrated that the Raven Guard had not abandoned larger-scale operations entirely. The assault began with a coordinated infiltration phase, with more Dathan teams eliminating perimeter security and disabling void shield generators. Once these objectives were secured, the main force struck from multiple vectors simultaneously, using the cover of a severe electrical storm to mask their approach. The word-bearers responded with both conventional defenses and warp-based powers that twisted reality around the battlefield. Demonic entities materialized among the Raven Guard formations, while corrupted psychers unleashed energies that could melt ceramite armor and flesh alike. Corax countered by personally leading the assault on the central ritual site, his mastery of shadow walking allowing him to appear seemingly from nowhere among the enemy psychers. The confrontation between Corax and Apostle said became the stuff of Legion legend. The word-bearer had undergone some form of demonic transformation, his body swollen with warp energies that rendered him nearly twice the size of a normal Astartes. Witnesses described how said unleashed blasts of warp fire that would have incinerated even a Primarch, yet Corax moved through them like smoke, his power whip lashing out to sever the Apostle's limbs before his lightning claws pierced the traitor's primary heart. With Sed's death, the ritual collapsed, triggering a cascading warp implosion that destroyed much of the central settlement. The surviving word-bearers were systematically eliminated over the following days, with no prisoners taken. When Imperial authorities arrived to reclaim the planet, they found a world cleansed of chaos taint, but bearing the unmistakable signs of Raven Guard justice, traitor commanders crucified on the walls of their own fortifications, their armor and flesh marked with the Raven symbol. As the Scouring progressed, a new challenge emerged that would reshape the Adeptus Astartes forever: the implementation of Robute Guilliman's Codex Astartes. The Ultramarines Primarch, concerned about the potential for another heresy, proposed dividing the legions into smaller chapters to ensure that no single commander could ever again control the power of a full legion. This radical reorganization generated significant controversy among the surviving Primarchs, with Rogel Dorn and Vulcan initially opposing the measure. Corax's position on the Codex was complex and nuanced. While he understood Guilliman's concerns about concentrated power, the Raven Guard had already been reduced to approximately chapter strength by the heresy's end. More significantly, Corax recognized that the specialized nature of Raven Guard warfare required maintaining certain organizational structures and training methodologies that might not align perfectly with standardized Codex doctrine. After careful consideration and private discussions with Guilliman, Corax ultimately supported the Codex's implementation with specific modifications for the Raven Guard. The Legion would divide into chapters as required, but certain elements of their unique combat doctrine would be preserved across all successor chapters. This compromise position helped ease tensions between the more dogmatic supporters and opponents of the Codex, contributing to its eventual adoption. The practical implementation of the Codex began in the year 21 of the 31st millennium, approximately 2 years after the Emperor's internment on the Golden Throne. The Raven Guard, already operating at reduced strength, formed the core of what would become the Raven Guard chapter, retaining their homeworld of deliverance and the majority of the Legion's relics and historical records. Corax personally selected Vincent VI, who had partially redeemed himself after the Raptor project failure through exemplary service during the Scouring, as the first chapter master. The creation of successor chapters required careful consideration of both personnel distribution and cultural preservation. Unlike legions that could create multiple full-strength chapters, the Raven Guard's limited numbers meant that only a few successor chapters could be formed initially. Each needed to receive sufficient veterans to maintain the Legion's specialized combat techniques while developing their own distinct identities. The Raptor chapter became the first and most prominent successor, formed around a cadre of veterans who had specialized in rapid assault operations during the Shadow War. Their name reclaimed the term from the failed genetic project, transforming it from a reminder of disaster to a symbol of the Legion's resilience. The Raptor chapter received a significant portion of the Legion's remaining jump pack equipment and assault vehicles, specializing in the lightning warfare aspect of Raven Guard doctrine. The Black Guard formed the second major successor chapter, taking their name from one of the elite companies of the pre-Heresy Legion. They inherited the more deliberate aspects of Raven Guard doctrine, specializing in extended infiltration operations and target elimination. The chapter established its fortress monastery on Nile, a sparsely populated death world whose harsh conditions provided excellent training grounds for stealth and survival techniques. Several smaller successor chapters emerged in subsequent foundings, including the Dark Eagles and the Revilers, each preserving elements of Raven Guard tactical doctrine while developing distinctive operational approaches. Corax maintained contact with all his successor chapters during this transitional period, ensuring that while they developed independent identities, they remained true to the core principles that had defined the 19th Legion. The preservation of Raven Guard traditions proved challenging under the standardized structure of the Codex. Many of their specialized units and operational methods did not align neatly with Guilliman's organizational templates. The Mordathan, for instance, represented a genetic lineage as much as a tactical formation, comprising warriors who had inherited Corax's rare shadow walking ability. Similarly, the Legion's emphasis on operational autonomy and mission-specific force organization conflicted with the more rigid company structures outlined in the Codex. Corax addressed these challenges by implementing what became known as the Talons Doctrine, a supplementary document to the Codex that outlined modifications specifically for Raven Guard successors. The doctrine preserved key specialized formations while adapting their structure to fit within Codex parameters. The Mordathan, for example, were reorganized as a specialized squad type that could be attached to various companies as needed rather than maintained as a separate formation. Training methodologies represented another area where Raven Guard traditions required preservation. The Legion had developed sophisticated protocols for teaching infiltration techniques, environmental adaptation, and target assessment that went beyond standard Codex training regimens. Corax worked with his senior officers to codify these methods in what became known as the Raven's Way, a training manual that supplemented the combat doctrines outlined in the Codex. The reorganization extended beyond combat doctrine to include cultural practices and chapter rituals. The Raven Guard had developed distinctive traditions during their history, many rooted in the liberation of deliverance and the experiences of the heresy. These included the Remembering, a meditative practice where warriors would spend hours in darkness, recalling fallen brothers and the lessons learned from their sacrifice. Similarly, the Shadow Walk initiation required aspirants to navigate the abandoned mining tunnels of Deliverance without equipment, testing their resourcefulness and adaptability. Corax ensured these practices were documented and transmitted to all successor chapters, providing cultural continuity despite organizational changes. Each chapter might adapt these traditions to their specific circumstances, but the underlying principles remained consistent: emphasis on liberation rather than conquest, precision over brute force, and the responsibility to fight on behalf of those who could not defend themselves. The physical transformation of the Raven Guard during this period reflected their organizational changes. New armor and equipment were manufactured according to standardized patterns, gradually replacing the heavily modified gear that had characterized the Legion during the Heresy. The distinctive black color scheme remained, though successor chapters introduced variations, such as the Raptor chapter's dark blue trim or the Black Guard's silver helmet markings. As the Reformation progressed, Corax became increasingly withdrawn. Those close to the Primarch noticed his growing preoccupation with the failed Raptor project and the broader question of his responsibility for the Legion's near destruction at Istvan. He spent long periods in isolation, reviewing historical records and intelligence reports related to the traitor Primarchs, particularly Lorgar of the Word Bearers. The final phase of Corax's leadership came approximately a decade after the Heresy's end. Having established his successor chapters and ensured the preservation of Raven Guard traditions within the new Codex structure, the Primarch called together his senior commanders for what would be his final council. What transpired in that meeting remains sealed in the most restricted archives of the chapter, but the outcome is well documented. Corax announced his intention to depart into the Eye of Terror in pursuit of final justice against the traitor Primarchs. Before leaving, Corax spent several days updating the Legion's historical records, ensuring that the lessons of the Heresy would not be lost to future generations. He visited each of the successor chapter masters personally, providing final guidance and entrusting them with specific responsibilities in his absence. To Vicent VI, now master of the Raven Guard chapter, he gave his personal copy of the Codex Astartes, annotated with his observations and modifications. Corax's departure was characteristically understated. He took a single ship, the Avenger, accompanied by only a small honor guard of veterans who had served with him since before Istvan. The vessel was last recorded passing the Cadian Gate, heading directly into the Eye of Terror. Occasional reports in subsequent centuries claimed sightings of the Primarch hunting traitor forces within that hellish realm, but none have been conclusively verified. The legacy of Corax's reforms endured long after his departure. The Raven Guard and their successors maintained their distinctive approach to warfare despite the standardization of the Codex, preserving the specialized skills and tactics that had defined the 19th Legion. When faced with overwhelming enemies, they continued to employ the lessons of the Shadow War, strategic patience, precise application of force, and the psychological impact of striking from unexpected quarters. Perhaps most significantly, the chapters preserved Corax's fundamental ethos, that Astartes existed to protect humanity rather than rule over it. While other chapters increasingly separated themselves from the populations they defended, the Raven Guard maintained connections to civilian communities, particularly those suffering under oppression or tyranny. This philosophical foundation, established during Corax's liberation of Deliverance and reinforced through the trials of the Heresy, remained their most distinctive characteristic in the post-Heresy Imperium. The recruitment process of the Raven Guard has always been as distinctive as their combat doctrine. While many Space Marine chapters draw aspirants from feudal worlds or savage death worlds, the Sons of Corax look to the darkest corners of human society, specifically, the prison slums of Kievar that orbit beneath the shadow of Deliverance. These facilities evolved from the original prison moon structure that once housed political dissidents during the time before Corax's arrival. Though no longer officially designated as prisons, these sprawling hab complexes maintain many characteristics of their former purpose. Towering ferrocrete structures packed with cramped living quarters house millions of workers who labor in Kievar's manufactoria. Security checkpoints control movement between districts, and local enforcers, many corrupt or in the service of powerful industrial guilds, maintain a brutal form of order. The Raven Guard recruiters, known as the Choosers, move through these environments in plainclothes, watching for potential candidates. They seek not merely physical strength or aggression, but specific qualities that align with the chapter's needs: resourcefulness, stealth, and a deep-seated resistance to oppression. Candidates often emerge from gang conflicts or underground resistance movements, youths who have demonstrated both the physical resilience to survive harsh conditions and the moral strength to fight against tyranny rather than become tyrants themselves. One distinctive aspect of this recruitment process is the shadow trial. Rather than announcing their presence or conducting formal tests, the Choosers observe potential recruits from afar, sometimes for months. They arrange situations to test candidates, perhaps ensuring that food supplies to a certain district are disrupted, then watching how different youth leaders respond to the crisis. Those who organize fair distribution systems, rather than hoarding resources for themselves, might receive further attention. The final selection comes without warning. Successful candidates are extracted during the night, sometimes believing they are being arrested or assassinated by rival gangs until they arrive at the Raven Spire. This approach ensures that only those who maintain their principles, even when unobserved, are admitted to the chapter's ranks, a reflection of Corax's belief that true character is revealed when one believes no one is watching. Once at the Raven Spire, aspirants undergo standard hypno-indoctrination and surgical procedures to receive their gene seed implants. However, the Raven Guard process differs from other chapters in several notable ways, reflecting the unique characteristics of their Primarch's genetic legacy. The most visible manifestation of Raven Guard gene seed is the mutation of the melanochromic organ. In most chapters, this implant regulates skin pigmentation in response to radiation exposure. In the Raven Guard, it functions abnormally, causing most battle brothers to develop extremely pale skin and dark eyes over time. This process accelerates with service years, with veterans often displaying skin as white as parchment and eyes that appear as solid black orbs. This mutation appears to have existed since the earliest days of the 19th Legion, predating Corax's discovery. Historical records from the Great Crusade describe the pale nomads as unnaturally pallid even before their Primarch's influence shaped their development. The genetic trait became more pronounced after Corax took command, suggesting that his genetic template amplified this characteristic. More problematic is the malfunction of the mucranoid implant within Raven Guard gene seed. This organ, when functioning correctly, allows Space Marines to sweat a waxy substance that protects them from extreme environmental conditions, including vacuum exposure. In Raven Guard Astartes, the mucranoid often fails to activate properly or produces insufficient protection. This deficiency requires Raven Guard to rely more heavily on their power armor's environmental systems when operating in hostile environments. Apothecaries have worked for millennia to address these gene seed quirks with limited success. The melanochromic mutation appears to be deeply embedded in the chapter's genetic material, possibly linked to the same genes that provide their exceptional stealth capabilities. More concerning to the chapter's leadership is evidence that these mutations have grown more pronounced over successive generations of implantation, suggesting a slow degradation of gene seed stability. Beyond these known issues lies a more closely guarded secret, the rare genetic anomaly that produces the Mordathan, or Shadow Masters. Approximately 1 in 100 aspirants inherits a rare trait from Corax's gene line that allows them to manipulate light and shadow around their bodies, achieving near invisibility even without technological assistance. This ability manifests differently than standard chameleoning technology or optical camouflage, functioning through some biological interaction with ambient light that remains poorly understood even by the chapter's apothecaries. The Raven Spire itself reflects the chapter's nature as clearly as their genetic quirks. Rising from the barren surface of Deliverance, the Fortress Monastery occupies the same mountain that once housed the command center during Lycius's days as a prison moon. The external structure appears smaller than many chapter fortresses, with much of its bulk concealed within the mountain itself. Approaching vessels see only a series of black spires emerging from the rocky surface, their surfaces designed to absorb auger scans rather than reflect them. Defense systems remain hidden until activated, with macro cannon emplacements concealed beneath retractable shields and void shield generators buried deep within the mountain. This design philosophy, revealing only what must be seen, extends throughout the fortress. Inside, the Raven Spire's layout defies conventional logic. Corridors twist unexpectedly, sometimes leading to dead ends or circling back on themselves. Chambers change their configuration through hidden mechanisms, and certain areas can only be accessed by passing through specific sequences of rooms in the correct order. This labyrinthine design serves both defensive purposes and as a constant training environment, ensuring that Raven Guard battle brothers maintain their exceptional navigational skills and spatial awareness. The lowest levels of the Raven Spire contain facilities rarely seen by outsiders. Training chambers with advanced hololithic projectors recreate environments from across the galaxy, allowing for specialized infiltration practice. Armories house the chapter's collection of modified equipment, including prototype stealth systems and specialized ammunition types. Deeper still lies the Shadowhold, a secure vault containing records of the chapter's most sensitive operations and technologies. The relationship between the Raven Guard and the Forge world of Kievar has evolved significantly since the days of Corax. What was once an oppressive industrial power that used Lycius as a prison moon has become a productive partnership, though not without lingering tensions. The tech guilds that once ruled Kievar were dismantled after Corax's rebellion, replaced with a more equitable system that maintains production efficiency while improving conditions for workers. Kievar's manufactoria now produce much of the equipment used by the Raven Guard, including specialized variants of standard Adeptus Astartes gear. The Forge Masters of Kievar have become particularly adept at creating modified power armor components that enhance stealth capabilities, sound-dampening joints, auger-absorbing ceramic composites, and specialized power distribution systems that minimize electromagnetic signatures. This relationship benefits both parties. The Raven Guard receive custom-manufactured equipment tailored to their specific needs without having to rely entirely on distant Forge worlds. Kievar gains the protection of a Space Marine chapter and preferential treatment for their products within certain segments of the Imperium. However, the chapter maintains careful oversight of Kievar's production facilities, particularly those dealing with advanced technology, mindful of the planet's history of exploitation. The organizational structure of the Raven Guard diverges from the Codex Astartes in subtle but significant ways, reflecting both their reduced numbers after the Horus Heresy and their specialized approach to warfare. While maintaining the appearance of standard company organizations, the actual deployment of forces typically occurs through mission-specific task forces drawn from across the chapter. At the highest level, the chapter master, traditionally called the Master of Shadows, oversees operations with the assistance of the Shadow Council, comprising the senior Shadow Captains, Master Apothecary, Master of the Forge, and Chief Librarian. Below this level, the 10 companies prescribed by the Codex exist nominally, but their composition and leadership remain more fluid than in more doctrinally rigid chapters. The Shadow Captains who lead these companies hold greater autonomy than their counterparts in other chapters, with authority to initiate operations based on their own intelligence and judgment, rather than waiting for explicit orders from higher command. This distributed leadership approach allows the Raven Guard to respond quickly to emerging threats and opportunities across multiple sectors simultaneously. A distinctive feature of Raven Guard organization is the role of the Shadow Masters within the chapter hierarchy. These rare individuals who possess Corax's shadow walking ability serve as both elite operatives and special advisors to the Shadow Captains. While not formally placed above other veterans in the command structure, their unique capabilities and typically extensive experience give their recommendations significant weight in operational planning. Shadow Masters often lead the most sensitive infiltration missions, particularly those targeting heavily defended enemy positions or requiring extended operation behind enemy lines. Their ability to move unseen makes them ideal for reconnaissance, assassination, and sabotage operations, where even standard Raven Guard stealth techniques might prove insufficient. During larger deployments, they typically operate independently from main forces, creating diversions or eliminating key targets to support the primary objective. The training of these specialized warriors differs from standard Raven Guard protocols. Upon identification of the shadow walking trait, aspirants are separated for additional instruction under existing shadow masters. This training focuses not merely on utilizing their natural abilities, but on understanding their limitations. The shadow walking effect can be negated by certain lighting conditions, psychic detection, or advanced augur systems specifically calibrated to detect their unique energy signature. Beyond the shadow masters, the Raven Guard maintains several specialized formations that reflect their combat doctrine. The Shadow Strike kill teams comprise veterans equipped with modified scout armor and specialized weapons for deep infiltration missions. The Darkwing Assault Squads utilize customized jump packs with reduced acoustic signatures for rapid deployment and extraction. The Talon Squads specialize in urban warfare, using grapnel launchers and repelling equipment to navigate vertical environments with exceptional speed. This organizational flexibility allows the Raven Guard to adapt quickly to changing battlefield conditions and enemy tactics. When intelligence indicates a new threat or vulnerability, specialized teams can be assembled from across the chapter's companies, bringing together the specific skills and equipment needed for that particular mission, rather than deploying standardized formations that might be ill-suited to the task. The chapter's approach to warfare remains firmly rooted in the principles established by Corax. Gather comprehensive intelligence before engaging, strike precisely at critical vulnerabilities, and withdraw before the enemy can mount an effective response. While other chapters might measure success by territory controlled or enemies slain in direct confrontation, the Raven Guard evaluate their operations based on strategic impact relative to resources expended. This philosophy extends to their equipment and battlefield deployments. Raven Guard rarely commit their full strength to a single engagement, preferring to deploy multiple smaller forces across different theaters. Their vehicle pool emphasizes mobility and stealth over raw firepower, with land speeders and aircraft modified for reduced signatures seeing more use than heavy tanks or artillery. When heavier firepower becomes necessary, the chapter typically employs precision strikes rather than sustained bombardment, using specialized ammunition to neutralize specific targets while minimizing collateral damage. The shadow-based warfare of the Raven Guard has proven remarkably effective against a wide range of enemies. Against orcs, their ability to eliminate leadership figures and sabotage crude but vital infrastructure creates disproportionate disruption relative to the resources committed. When facing the traitor legions, their infiltration capabilities allow them to bypass corrupted human auxiliaries and strike directly at the Astartes commanders. Even the hive mind of the Tyranids can be temporarily disoriented by the simultaneous destruction of synapse creatures across multiple sectors of a battlefield. This approach has allowed the Raven Guard to maintain their effectiveness despite never fully recovering their pre-heresy numbers. By focusing their limited resources on high-value targets and avoiding attritional warfare, they have influenced conflicts far beyond what their deployment statistics might suggest. The shadow of the Raven falls across battlefields throughout the Imperium, often unnoticed until the moment its talons strike. The cloaking fields shimmered momentarily as the Raven Guard kill team advanced through the tangled undergrowth of Kashyyyk 4. Their midnight black armor, already difficult to detect in the perpetual twilight of the jungle moon, became nearly invisible as specialized systems dampened their heat signatures and absorbed ambient light. Squad Sergeant Kayvon moved with practiced precision, each step carefully placed to avoid disturbing the dense foliage or creating telltale sounds that might alert the orc sentries positioned less than 50 meters ahead. The Raven Guard's combat doctrine had evolved significantly since the dark days following the Drop Site Massacre, but its fundamental principles remained unchanged: reconnaissance before engagement, precision over brute force, and withdrawal before the enemy could mount an effective counterattack. These tenets, established by Corax during his rebellion on Deliverance, had been refined through millennia of warfare into what Imperial strategists now recognized as one of the most sophisticated approaches to combat in the Adeptus Astartes arsenal. Central to Raven Guard operations was their mastery of stealth and infiltration. Unlike other chapters who might announce their presence with thunderous drop pod assaults or armored spearheads, the Sons of Corax preferred to arrive undetected, sometimes operating for weeks within enemy territory before revealing their presence. This approach required specialized training that began during a battle brother's earliest days as a scout and continued throughout his service. The Umbra Protocol represented the most comprehensive codification of these techniques. Developed initially during the Shadow War against Horus's forces and refined over subsequent millennia, the protocol detailed methods for movement, communication, and engagement designed to minimize detection. Raven Guard Astartes learned to adjust their gait to match natural environmental rhythms, synchronizing their steps with wind patterns or ambient sounds to mask their movements. They studied how light interacted with different surfaces and materials, allowing them to identify optimal shadow patterns for concealment. Even their breathing was regulated, with specialized implants in their power armor recycling exhaled air to reduce vapor signatures in cold environments. These infiltration capabilities found their ultimate expression in the Ash Blind Maneuver, a complex battlefield technique that combined technological stealth systems with precise environmental manipulation. The maneuver typically began with specialized smoke grenades containing particulates that absorbed both visual light and augur returns. As these particles dispersed, Raven Guard warriors would move through the resulting cloud using memorized patterns designed to prevent collisions while maintaining formation integrity. The smoke itself was often enhanced with chemical compounds that interfered with olfactory senses or disrupted certain types of electronic scanning equipment. The effectiveness of this technique was demonstrated during the Vergast campaign, where a single squad of Raven Guard eliminated an entire Dark Eldar raiding party that had established a fortified position in the ruins of Hive Pharazoica. The Xenos, despite their own considerable expertise in stealth warfare, found their enhanced senses confounded by the Ash Blind deployment. Survivors reported attacking shadows that seemed to dissolve upon contact, only to materialize elsewhere moments later. By the operation's conclusion, 17 Dark Eldar warriors, including a high-ranking Archon, had been eliminated without a single Raven Guard casualty. The chapter's preference for specialized wargear directly supported these tactical approaches. While adhering to the basic templates provided by the Adeptus Mechanicus Raven Guard equipment typically incorporated modifications designed to enhance stealth capabilities or enable precision strikes from unexpected vectors. Their armories contained a higher proportion of sniper rifles, shotguns, and suppressed bolt weapons than most chapters, reflecting their emphasis on target elimination over mass engagement. Jump packs represented a particularly important element of Raven Guard equipment doctrine. Unlike the standard patterns used by other chapters, Raven Guard jump packs incorporated extensive sound baffling and modified exhaust systems that reduced their visual and acoustic signatures by approximately 68% compared to baseline models. The trade-off for this enhanced stealth capability was a slight reduction in fuel efficiency and maximum thrust, limitations that Raven Guard assault marines compensated for through precise flight path planning and momentum conservation techniques. These modified jump packs enabled one of the chapter's signature tactical approaches, the shrouded descent. This maneuver involved assault marines deploying from high altitude, often at night or during adverse weather conditions, with their jump packs operating at minimal power until the final moments before landing. The warriors essentially fell in a controlled glide, using their enhanced transhuman physiology to withstand G-forces that would incapacitate or kill unaugmented humans. Only in the final seconds before impact would they activate their jump packs at full power, arresting their descent and allowing for precise positioning among enemy formations. The shrouded descent proved particularly effective against enemies who relied on fixed defensive positions or early warning systems designed to detect conventional assault patterns. Orc encampments, typically protected by crude but effective perimeter defenses, could be bypassed entirely as Raven Guard warriors descended directly into command areas or ammunition stockpiles. Similarly, Tau fire bases with their sophisticated sensor arrays often failed to detect incoming Raven Guard until they were already within engagement range, neutralizing the Xeno's advantage in long-range firepower. Lightning Claws featured prominently in Raven Guard close combat doctrine, reflecting both practical considerations and cultural significance. From a tactical perspective, these weapons offered an optimal combination of lethality and control, allowing for precise elimination of priority targets while minimizing collateral damage or unwanted noise. Their effectiveness against armor made them particularly useful for neutralizing enemy commanders or specialists who typically benefited from enhanced protection. Beyond these practical advantages, Lightning Claws carried symbolic importance within the chapter. Corax himself had favored these weapons during the Great Crusade and Horus Heresy, and the distinctive pattern used by the Raven Guard, featuring slightly longer, more tapered blades than standard Imperial designs, was based on his original specifications. For veterans granted the honor of wielding these weapons, they represented a direct connection to their Primarch's legacy and a reminder of the precision and purpose that define the chapter's approach to warfare. Sniper rifles constituted another cornerstone of Raven Guard armament philosophy. The chapter maintained an unusually high proportion of these weapons, with specialized variants designed for different operational parameters. Standard Stalker pattern bolt rifles served for most engagements, while exotic needle sniper rifles were reserved for situations requiring complete silence or the delivery of specialized toxins. For operations against heavily armored targets, the chapter employed modified Exodus rifles, rare and precious weapons whose technology bordered on the heretical, but whose effectiveness against protected targets justified their carefully controlled use. The Raven Guard approach to void warfare reflected the same principles that guided their ground operations: stealth, precision, and strategic disruption rather than brute force. Their fleet, while modest compared to more naval-oriented chapters like the Imperial Fists or Black Templars, was optimized for rapid deployment and extraction of ground forces. Strike cruisers and frigates predominated over larger vessels, their profiles modified with auger-absorbent materials and specialized baffling systems around engine exhausts to reduce detectability in void space. These vessels typically operated alone or in small groups rather than concentrated battle formations, approaching target systems from unexpected vectors and often using celestial bodies or debris fields for concealment. When engaging enemy ships directly, Raven Guard captains preferred precision lance strikes against propulsion or command systems rather than broadside exchanges that might damage their own stealth systems. Boarding actions featured prominently in their void warfare doctrine, with specialized breaching teams trained to neutralize key personnel and systems rather than engaging in protracted ship-to-ship combat. The Battle of Amur Prime demonstrated the effectiveness of these approaches against numerically superior forces. When a Word-Bearer's fleet emerged from the warp near this vital agricultural world, the system's defenders faced certain defeat against the trader's superior firepower. The 3 Raven Guard vessels present, the strike cruiser Shadow of Deliverance and 2 Gladius-class frigates, disengaged from the main Imperial formation before the battle began, appearing to flee the system. In reality, the vessels executed a complex maneuver that used the system's dense asteroid belt for concealment while they circled behind the traitor formation. As the Word-Bearers engaged the remaining Imperial defenders, the Raven Guard ships emerged from concealment to launch precision strikes against the enemy flagship. Teleport Homer beacons, previously placed by infiltrators who had boarded under the guise of routine maintenance at a previous port, activated to deliver Terminator squads directly to the vessel's bridge and engine compartments. Within hours, the flagship was disabled and its command structure eliminated, throwing the remaining traitor vessels into disarray and allowing the Imperial defenders to counter-attack successfully. planetary assaults conducted by the Raven Guard similarly emphasized asymmetric approaches over conventional deployment patterns. Rather than establishing large beachheads or landing zones, the chapter preferred dispersed insertions of small teams at locations of strategic value, communication hubs, power generation facilities, water purification plants, or command centers. These teams would operate independently, but according to a coordinated timetable, creating simultaneous disruptions across enemy-held territory that prevented effective response to any single incursion. The Helbrecht insurrection provided a textbook example of this approach in action. When the planetary governor of Helbrecht declared independence from imperial rule and established a military junta supported by renegade PDF forces, conventional imperial response would have required a division strength guard deployment supported by extensive naval assets, resources that the overstretched Imperium could ill afford in that sector. Instead, a single Raven Guard strike force consisting of 3 tactical squads, 1 assault squad, and a Devastator squad was deployed via modified Thunderhawk gunships that approached the planet using its moon for sensor coverage. The force dispersed immediately upon landing, with individual squads targeting specific infrastructure nodes, identified through preliminary intelligence gathering. The planetary defense headquarters was neutralized by the assault squad, deploying directly onto its roof access points. Power distribution networks were disabled by precision melta charges placed by 1 tactical squad. Communications arrays were compromised by another team, who replaced critical components with sabotaged duplicates that appeared functional but transmitted all communications to Raven Guard receivers. Within 48 hours, the junta's ability to coordinate its forces had been completely undermined without most of the population even realizing that Astartes were present on the planet. This emphasis on surgical strikes over frontal assaults extended to the chapter's approach to urban warfare. Where other chapters might employ heavy weapons and armored vehicles to clear buildings block by block, the Raven Guard preferred to isolate and neutralize specific structures of strategic importance while bypassing others entirely. Their battle brothers trained extensively in vertical movement techniques, using grapnel launchers, modified jump packs, and specialized climbing equipment to access upper levels of buildings directly rather than fighting through ground floors. Combined with their stealth capabilities, these techniques allowed Raven Guard kill teams to eliminate enemy command elements or technical specialists while avoiding engagement with bulk infantry or defensive emplacements. The psychological impact of such operations often proved as valuable as their direct tactical effects. Enemy forces, aware that their leaders could be targeted at any moment regardless of apparent security measures, frequently became hesitant and overcautious, further reducing their combat effectiveness. The Raven Guard approach to warfare was not without limitations. Their emphasis on precision strikes and small unit operations made them less effective in scenarios requiring control of large territories or protracted defensive actions. Similarly, their specialized equipment and tactics required extensive training and preparation time that might not be available in rapidly developing crisis situations. Perhaps most significantly, their operations depended heavily on accurate intelligence. Without comprehensive understanding of enemy dispositions and capabilities, the chapter's surgical approach could target the wrong objectives or encounter unexpected resistance. These limitations were acknowledged and incorporated into Raven Guard's strategic planning. The chapter maintained close relationships with Imperial intelligence services, including the Inquisition and CERT elements of the Officio Assassinorum, ensuring access to the most current information available. They developed contingency protocols for situations where planned operations encountered unexpected complications, emphasizing flexibility and individual initiative rather than rigid adherence to original parameters. When assigned to campaigns requiring capabilities outside their specialized focus, they typically coordinated with other Imperial forces whose strengths complemented their limitations, guard regiments for territory control, other Astartes chapters for frontal assault capabilities, or Mechanicus elements for sustained siege operations. Through these approaches, the Raven Guard transformed apparent weaknesses into strategic advantages. Their relatively limited numbers compared to the theoretical full strength of a Codex-compliant chapter became irrelevant when their operations targeted critical vulnerabilities rather than engaging enemy forces directly. Their emphasis on stealth and precision allowed them to neutralize threats that might have required vastly greater resources to address through conventional means. Most importantly, their ability to strike without warning and withdraw before effective response could be mounted created a psychological deterrent that extended far beyond their physical presence. The mere rumor that Raven Guard might be operating in a sector often influenced enemy behavior, creating opportunities that other Imperial forces could exploit. In the grim darkness of the far future, where overwhelming threats emerged from all quarters and Imperial resources were stretched beyond their limits, the Sons of Corax represented a uniquely efficient application of the Emperor's will, shadows that struck with precision, talons that found the vital points of even the most formidable enemies, and warriors who understood that victory came not from glorious last stands but from the careful, methodical elimination of those who threatened humanity's survival. The Second Armageddon War found the Raven Guard deploying under unusual circumstances. Unlike their typical operations, which favored stealth and precision strikes against key targets, the scale of Gazkul Thrakas demanded a more conventional approach. When the Orc invasion began in the year 940, one of the 41st millennium, Shadow Captain Solari led elements from the 2nd and 4th Companies to Armageddon's Steel Legion defense line in the Ash Wastes region. The Raven Guard's initial deployment centered around Hive Acheron, where their strike cruiser, the Triumph of Deliverance, established high orbit to provide reconnaissance and rapid response capabilities. Rather than committing to the grinding trench warfare that characterized much of the Imperial defense, Solari's forces identified critical weaknesses in the Orc supply lines stretching across the vast wastes between major Hive cities. Operating from concealed forward bases established in the maze of volcanic fissures that scarred the planet's surface, Raven Guard kill teams conducted night raids against Orc fuel depots and ammunition stockpiles. Their modified land speeders, equipped with enhanced stealth systems developed by the chapter's tech marines, proved particularly effective in the ash-choked environment, allowing strike teams to approach within meters of Orc sentries without detection. The most significant Raven Guard action during this campaign came when Solari's forces identified the approach of a massive Orc Stampa formation toward the already beleaguered Hive Acheron. Rather than engaging these walking fortresses directly, a suicidal proposition even for Astartes, the Raven Guard targeted the specialized mechbow crews responsible for maintaining the complex war machines. Using their Shadow Strike protocol, 5-man kill teams infiltrated the Orc encampment during a severe ash storm, eliminating 37 mechbows in a single night. The effect was devastating. Without their technical specialists, the Orcs found their Stampas increasingly unreliable. Weapon systems misfired, locomotion units seized up, and power plants overheated. By the time the formation reached Imperial lines, nearly half the war machines had become inoperable, while others moved at significantly reduced capacity. The Steel Legion's Lima and Rust battalions, which would have been overwhelmed by the original force, managed to hold the line and eventually pushed the Orcs back. Commander Dante of the Blood Angels, coordinating overall Astartes operations during the war, specifically acknowledged the Raven Guard's contribution in his tactical assessments. His reports to the High Lords noted that, while other chapters had achieved more visible victories, the Sons of Corax had broken the back of the enemy advance before it reached our lines. The Third Armageddon War saw the Raven Guard return to the embattled Hive world, this time under the leadership of Shadow Captain Kayvon Shrike. Having already established a reputation for his actions against Orc forces in the Targus system, Shrike brought specialized experience that proved invaluable as Gazkul's forces returned in even greater numbers. Shrike's approach focused on the Orc command structure rather than supply lines. Recognizing that Orc society functioned on a strict hierarchy of strength, he developed the decapitation pattern strategy, a a systematic targeting of Nob leaders and warbosses designed to fragment the larger orc formations into competing smaller bands. The Third Company, supported by elements of the 10th Scout Company, operated primarily in the Fire Wastes region, where the most aggressive orc clans had established their main encampments. Using their Corvus pattern jump packs, Raven Guard assault teams would strike at orc leadership during rare rest periods, often targeting multiple encampments simultaneously to prevent coordinated responses. Shrike personally led the most ambitious of these operations, a raid against Warboss Grak Thraka's compound in the heart of orc-held territory. Intelligence gathered by infiltrated scouts had identified this particular warboss as controlling several of the largest mobs threatening the southern hive clusters. The compound, surrounded by crude but effective defensive works and guarded by Grak Thraka's personal Nob retinue, would have been impregnable to a conventional assault. The Raven Guard approach was anything but conventional. Shrike's team deployed from high altitude during a massive ash storm, their jump packs modified to operate in near silence despite the turbulent conditions. They inserted through a blind spot in the orc perimeter, identified by scout observations, moving through the compound with such speed and precision that many orcs were eliminated before they could sound alarms. Grak Thraka himself proved a formidable opponent. The massive orc, augmented with crude bionics and wielding a power claw that could shear through ceramite, fought with the savage cunning that made his species such dangerous enemies. Shrike engaged him directly, his lightning claws striking with precision to sever vital cybernetic components before delivering the killing blow through the warboss's primary heart. The team extracted before the orc camp fully realized what had happened, leaving Grak Thraka's severed head mounted prominently on his own throne, a psychological blow that sent the orc hierarchy into disarray. Within days, the various Nobs under Grak Thraka's command began fighting among themselves for dominance, fragmenting what had been a coordinated force of over 20,000 orcs into competing warbands that could be isolated and eliminated by Imperial forces. By the war's conclusion, Shrike's forces had eliminated 17 major warbosses and over 200 Nobs, effectively crippling the orc command structure in their assigned sector. The chapter's casualties remained minimal compared to other Astartes formations, with only 11 battle brothers lost throughout the entire campaign, a testament to the effectiveness of their approach against even the most numerous enemy. The Raven Guard's involvement in the Badab War presented different challenges. Unlike the straightforward orc threat on Armageddon, this conflict pitted Astartes against Astartes in a tangled web of politics, honor, and betrayal. When Luft-Huron, chapter master of the Astral Claws, declared the Badab sector independent from imperial taxation, he sparked a civil war that would eventually draw in multiple Space Marine chapters on both sides. The Raven Guard initially maintained distance from the conflict, as their primary operational theaters lay elsewhere in the Imperium. However, as evidence mounted that Huron's actions represented not merely political rebellion, but potential corruption, Chapter Master Corvin Severax committed forces to the Loyalist side under the command of Shadow Captain Ethan Sean. Sean's approach to the conflict reflected the Raven Guard's traditional emphasis on intelligence gathering and precision strikes. Rather than engaging directly in the void battles that characterized the early phases of the war, Raven Guard strike cruisers operated on the periphery of contested systems, deploying small teams to gather intelligence on Astral Claws movements and fortifications. The information they collected proved crucial during the assault on Badab Primaris itself. Raven Guard infiltrators had identified critical vulnerabilities in the planet's otherwise formidable defense grid, specifically a series of maintenance access tunnels beneath the primary shield generators that had been omitted from official schematics. This intelligence allowed Loyalist forces to insert strike teams directly into the heart of Huron's defenses, bypassing layers of fortifications that would have cost thousands of lives to overcome conventionally. During the final assault on Huron's fortress, the Palace of Thorns, Raven Guard teams focused on eliminating the Astral Claws command and control capabilities rather than engaging in frontal assaults. Shadow Captain Sean personally led a squad that disabled the palace's internal Vox network, isolating defensive sectors from central coordination. Meanwhile, other teams targeted power distribution nodes, systematically darkening sections of the massive complex to create confusion among the defenders. The most significant Raven Guard contribution came when Scout Sergeant Ixion identified Huron's personal escape route, a heavily shielded underground transit system connecting the palace to a concealed landing pad where the tyrant's flagship maintained orbit. This discovery allowed Loyalist commanders to position forces to intercept Huron during his attempted extraction, leading to the confrontation that would leave him grievously wounded and transform him into the piratical Chaos Lord known as Huron Blackheart. The Damocles Gulf crusade against the expanding Tau Empire saw the Raven Guard employing their skills against a technologically sophisticated adversary with capabilities that countered many traditional Astartes advantages. The Tau's advanced sensor technology, superior ranged weaponry, and sophisticated electronic warfare systems presented unique challenges for forces that relied on stealth and surprise. Shadow Captain Corvin Valor, commanding elements of the 5th and 10th Companies, quickly recognized that conventional Raven Guard infiltration techniques would be ineffective against Tau's sensor grids. Instead, he developed what became known as the electromagnetic shroud doctrine, a combination of technical countermeasures and tactical adaptations designed specifically to exploit weaknesses in Tau detection systems. The chapter's Techmarines modified standard equipment with specialized dampening fields that reduced electromagnetic signatures. Scout squads were equipped with prototype Ghost armor incorporating Tau-derived technology captured in earlier skirmishes. Most significantly, the Librarius developed new applications for their psychic abilities, creating localized distortions in the warp that confused Tau sensors without triggering their limited psychic awareness. These adaptations proved effective during operations on Daleth, a major Tau sept world targeted during the Crusade. When conventional Imperial forces found themselves stalled by sophisticated defense lines, Raven Guard kill teams infiltrated behind Tau positions to target their ethereal leadership caste. The Tau, who had configured their sensors primarily to detect the massive electromagnetic and thermal signatures of Imperial Guard armor, proved vulnerable to the Raven Guard's adapted approach. The most notable engagement occurred at the Daleth Central Coordination Facility, a massive communication hub that linked Tau defensive networks across 3 continents. Previous Imperial attempts to neutralize this target through bombing runs had failed due to concentric layers of anti-aircraft defenses. Valor's solution was characteristically indirect. Rather than attacking the facility itself, Raven Guard teams targeted the geothermal power plant that supplied its energy needs. Using intelligence gathered by infiltrated scouts, they identified a maintenance cycle that would temporarily reduce the plant's security while technical drones performed routine inspections. The strike team, comprising veterans equipped with modified power armor that mimicked Tau electromagnetic signatures, entered the facility during this window and placed melta charges at structural weak points identified through careful analysis of captured Tau architectural data. The resulting explosion didn't destroy the power plant entirely, but created a cascading failure that forced Tau engineers to initiate emergency shutdown protocols. With their primary power source offline, the coordination facility's defense systems defaulted to auxiliary power, creating a 5-minute window where certain security subsystems remained inactive. A second Raven Guard team, already positioned in concealment near the facility, exploited this brief vulnerability to infiltrate and upload a scrap code variant developed by Mechanicus, adept specifically to disrupt Tau computer systems. The effect rippled through Tau defensive networks across the region. Communication systems transmitted garbled data. Targeting arrays provided false coordinates. Automated defense turrets failed to distinguish between friend and foe. The resulting confusion allowed Imperial Guard armored divisions to breach Tau lines at multiple points, gaining significant territory before the Tau could restore their systems. While the Damocles Gulf Crusade ultimately ended in stalemate due to the greater threat of Hive Fleet Behemoth, the Raven Guard's contributions demonstrated their adaptability against even technologically superior enemies. The techniques developed during this campaign would later prove valuable in operations against other advanced adversaries, including Dark Eldar raiding parties and certain Mechanicus separatist factions. The Indomitus Crusade marked a watershed moment for the Raven Guard, as it did for all chapters of the Adeptus Astartes. The arrival of Robute Guilliman and his gift of Primaris technology presented both opportunity and challenge for a chapter whose identity was so deeply rooted in specialized combat doctrines developed over millennia. Chapter Master Kayvon Shrike, elevated to leadership following the death of Corvus Corax during the fall of Cadia, approached the integration of Primaris Marines with characteristic caution. Unlike some chapters that immediately deployed their new warriors in existing formations, Shrike established specialized training cadres led by veteran battle brothers to ensure that the enhanced capabilities of the Primaris were properly aligned with Raven Guard tactical doctrines. The physical advantages of the Primaris, greater strength, resilience, and stamina, initially seemed at odds with the chapter's emphasis on stealth and mobility. Their larger size and heavier armor potentially made them less suited to the infiltration operations that had defined Raven Guard warfare for millennia. However, Shrike recognized that these apparent limitations could be overcome through adaptation of both technology and doctrine. The chapter's Tech Marines worked closely with representatives from Belisarius Call's organization to modify Primaris armor patterns with Raven Guard stealth systems. The Mark X Phobos armor proved particularly receptive to these adaptations, its systems already designed with reconnaissance and infiltration in mind. Additional modifications to the Omniscope Auspex systems, power distribution networks, and auto senses enhanced these capabilities further, creating a variant optimized for Raven Guard operations. Tactically, Shrike developed new doctrines that leveraged the Primaris Marines' enhanced physical capabilities while maintaining the chapter's traditional emphasis on precision strikes. Inceptor squads, with their gravity-defying assault capabilities, were trained in modified versions of the shrouded descent maneuver. Infiltrator squads, already designed for forward deployment, received additional training in Raven Guard concealment techniques that complemented their advanced equipment. The first major deployment of Raven Guard Primaris forces came during the liberation of the Lux system from Death Guard occupation. The system's strategic importance as a navigational waypoint made it a priority target for the Indomitus Crusade, but the Death Guard had established deeply entrenched positions on the primary worlds, with disease factories corrupting both environment and population. Shrike deployed a mixed force comprising both Primaris and Firstborn Marines, organized into task-specific kill teams rather than standard company formations. Primaris infiltrators established forward observation posts in Death Guard-held territory, their enhanced resistance to disease allowing them to operate in contaminated zones that would have required extensive protection for Firstborn Marines. Reaver squads trained in Raven Guard terror tactics targeted Death Guard communication hubs, eliminating Traitor Astartes officers with precision headshots from their heavy bolt pistols before disappearing into the corrupted landscape. The most significant engagement occurred on Lux Tertius, where the Death Guard had established their primary disease factory within a former Imperial cathedral. Previous Imperial attempts to destroy this facility had failed, with even orbital bombardment proving ineffective against its warp-reinforced structure. Shrike's solution combined traditional Raven Guard infiltration techniques with the new capabilities offered by Primaris technology. A team of Vanguard veterans equipped with jump packs created a diversion by attacking a Death Guard outpost several kilometers from the main facility. As Plague Marines responded to this threat, Inceptor squads performed a high-altitude insertion directly onto the cathedral's roof, using their jump pack's enhanced thrust capabilities to decelerate from terminal velocity without the telltale emissions that would have betrayed conventional jump pack approaches. Once in position, the Inceptors secured access points for a follow-up team of intercessors equipped with specialized melta charges developed specifically to overcome warp-reinforced structures. These charges were placed at key structural points, identified through careful analysis of the cathedral's original architectural plans, retrieved from Mechanicus archives by chapter serfs before the operation began. The resulting detonation didn't merely destroy the disease factory, but collapsed the warp space pocket that had been created within the cathedral, causing a cascading failure that purged corruption from the surrounding area. Death Guard forces, suddenly cut off from the warp energies that had sustained them, found themselves vulnerable to conventional attacks from Imperial forces that had been positioned in anticipation of this moment. The Lux System campaign demonstrated the effective integration of Primaris capabilities into Raven Guard doctrine, setting the pattern for subsequent operations throughout the Indomitus Crusade. Rather than simply replacing Firstborn Marines with their Primaris counterparts, Shrike established a complementary relationship between the two, with each deployed according to their specific strengths and the requirements of particular missions. This adaptive approach proved particularly valuable during operations against the more unusual threats encountered during the Crusade. When facing Necron forces on Arathor, Primaris Eliminators with their specialized bolt sniper rifles proved capable of targeting the Xenos resurrection orbs with sufficient precision to disrupt their reanimation protocols. Against Tyrannid splinter fleets, aggressor squads provided the sustained firepower needed to contain hordes of smaller organisms, while more mobile elements targeted synapse creatures. By the Crusade's conclusion, the Raven Guard had fully incorporated Primaris technology into their combat doctrine, without sacrificing the tactical identity established by Corax millennia earlier. Their operations remained characterized by careful intelligence gathering, precision strikes against critical targets, and withdrawal before enemy forces could effectively respond, principles now executed with enhanced capabilities that made them more effective than ever against the diverse threats facing the Imperium in the wake of the Great Rift. The Raven Guard chapter has always defined itself through adaptation and evolution, a trait that would serve them well in the tumultuous era following the creation of the Cicatrix Maledictum. While many Imperial organizations struggled with broken communication and fragmented command structures, the Sons of Corax had been operating in small, autonomous units since the aftermath of the Drop Site Massacre. This operational flexibility allowed them to maintain effectiveness even as the Imperium itself fractured along the burning scar that now divided the galaxy. Chapter Master Kayvon Shrike's leadership style reflected this adaptive approach. Rising through the ranks from humble beginnings, Shrike had distinguished himself during the Third Armageddon War through his guerrilla operations against Orc forces. His tactical acumen and personal combat prowess eventually elevated him to command of the Third Company before his ascension to Chapter Master following the death of Corvin Severax during the 13th Black Crusade. Shrike's elevation came at a critical juncture for both the chapter and the wider Imperium. The fall of Cadia and the subsequent formation of the Great Rift created unprecedented strategic challenges. Countless worlds found themselves cut off from Terra, isolated in what became known as the Imperium Nihilus. For a chapter already accustomed to operating with minimal support behind enemy lines, these conditions were less disruptive than for more conventional forces. Under Shrike's direction, the Raven Guard adapted their deployment patterns to address the new reality. Small strike forces were dispatched to key systems throughout the Imperium Nihilus, operating independently, but according to broad strategic guidelines established before their departure. These teams focused on preserving Imperial infrastructure, eliminating enemy leadership, and gathering intelligence that could be transmitted during brief windows when astropathic communication proved possible. The integration of Primaris Marines into the chapter continued to present both opportunities and challenges. The genetic stability of these new Astartes addressed one of the Raven Guard's long-standing concerns, the degradation of their gene seed that had plagued them since the heresy. Apothecaries noted that Primaris battle brothers showed none of the genetic drift that had affected previous generations, with the melanochromic organ functioning at proper levels rather than producing the extreme pallor characteristic of veteran firstborn Marines. This genetic stability raised questions about the chapter's identity. Would these new warriors still be true sons of Corax if they did not develop the physical characteristics that had defined the Raven Guard for millennia? The answer emerged gradually as the Primaris Marines served alongside their firstborn brothers. While their skin might not blanch to the same ghostly white, they demonstrated the same aptitude for stealth operations, the same commitment to precision over brute force, and the same dedication to protecting the innocent rather than simply destroying the guilty. More significantly, a small percentage of Primaris Marines began displaying abilities previously seen only in the Mordathan, the shadow walking trait inherited directly from Corax's gene line. This development surprised even veteran apothecaries, who had believed the trait too deeply buried in the chapter's damaged gene seed to manifest in the reconstructed Primaris version. The emergence of these abilities in the new generation confirmed that despite Call's modifications, these warriors remained true inheritors of the Raven Lord's legacy. The tactical integration of Primaris units continued to evolve as their specialized capabilities became better understood. Vanguard formations proved particularly valuable for Raven Guard operations, their equipment and training already aligned with the chapter's infiltration doctrine. Shrike developed new operational protocols that paired Primaris infiltrators with firstborn scout squads, combining the advanced equipment of the former with the field experience of the latter. Similarly, Inceptor squads trained alongside veteran assault marines, adapting the chapter's aerial insertion techniques to leverage their enhanced mobility. These adaptations were tested during the Pariah Nexus campaign, where Raven Guard forces encountered Necron technology capable of suppressing both psychic abilities and the warp itself. The shadow walking abilities of the Mordathan, which relied partially on manipulating light through subtle warp interactions, proved inconsistent within the Nexus. Similarly, certain stealth technologies that incorporated minor psychic components functioned poorly or failed entirely. Faced with these limitations, Shrike implemented what became known as the Umbra Protocol, a contingency developed specifically for operations in areas where conventional Raven Guard advantages might be neutralized. The protocol emphasized physical concealment over technological or psychic methods, with specialized training in movement techniques and environmental adaptation. Equipment modifications focused on purely mechanical solutions rather than those incorporating warp-influenced technology. The effectiveness of these adaptations was demonstrated during operations on Gyre 4, a world within the Pariah Nexus, where Necron forces had established a translocation gate. When conventional stealth approaches proved ineffective due to the Nexus's warp suppression effect, Raven Guard kill teams reverted to ancient camouflage techniques, combined with precisely timed movements, coordinated with environmental factors like dust storms and solar flares that temporarily degraded even Necron sensory capabilities. Beyond tactical adaptations, the post-Rift era brought renewed focus on the chapter's relationship with its Primarch. Corvus Corax had disappeared into the Eye of Terror millennia earlier, vowing to continue his hunt for the traitor Primarchs, particularly Lorgar of the Word-Bearers. For thousands of years, his fate remained unknown, with only occasional unconfirmed reports of a shadowy figure hunting traitor forces within the Eye. The formation of the Great Rift changed this situation dramatically. As the barriers between real space and the warp thinned across the galaxy, reports of Corax sightings increased substantially. Most notable was the account from Demon World 13912, where Word-Bearers forces under Demon Prince Kor, Pharaon, encountered what they described as the shadow that stalks. Survivors spoke of a massive figure that shifted between forms, sometimes appearing as a pale Primarch in midnight armor, other times as a flock of ravens, and most terrifyingly, as a creature of pure darkness with glowing white eyes that could move through solid matter. These accounts aligned with other reports from various warp-touched regions, suggesting that Corax had not simply survived within the warp, but had evolved, embracing aspects of his nature that had remained dormant during his time in real space. Like his brother Primarchs who had fallen to chaos, Corax appeared to have undergone a transformation, but unlike them, he had done so while maintaining his fundamental loyalty to the Emperor and hatred of the traitors. The implications of these developments were profound for the Raven Guard. Their Primarch had not been lost, but transformed, becoming something that transcended his original form while maintaining his essential purpose. Chapter librarians began compiling these accounts, studying them for insights into Corax's current nature and capabilities. Some even reported dreams or visions during meditation, glimpses of a shadowy figure moving through darkness between stars, hunting those who had betrayed the Emperor. Shrike maintained a pragmatic approach to these developments. While acknowledging the significance of the reports, he focused the chapter's attention on immediate operational concerns rather than metaphysical questions about their Primarch's transformation. The Raven Guard would continue their mission as they always had, striking from the shadows against those who threatened humanity, whether in the material realm or beyond. This practical focus characterized the chapter's approach to the broader conflicts of the era. While other Astartes chapters committed large forces to major war zones like Vigilus or the Plague Wars, the Raven Guard maintained their traditional emphasis on targeted operations against strategic objectives. Their contributions might be less visible than those of chapters that deployed in chapter strength, but their impact often proved disproportionate to their numbers. On Vigilus, for example, a single Raven Guard strike force infiltrated the Spire Habs of Hyperia, identifying and eliminating cultist cells before they could coordinate with Chaos forces attacking the Hive's outer defenses. On Connor, Raven Guard kill teams targeted Death Guard plague factories, destroying facilities that would have spread contagion across multiple systems if allowed to reach full production. The Raven Guard's relationship with the Primaris-led chapters of the Ultima founding proved complex and nuanced. These new chapters, created entirely from Primaris stock without the traditions and cultural memory of established chapters, approached warfare with a different perspective. While technically sharing the same gene line, chapters like the Sons of the Raven lacked the historical context that had shaped Raven Guard doctrine over millennia. Shrike established exchange programs between the Raven Guard and these successor chapters, sending veteran sergeants to serve as advisors and receiving Primaris officers for temporary attachment to Raven Guard companies. These exchanges helped transmit not merely tactical doctrines, but the underlying philosophy that had defined the Sons of Corax since the Great Crusade, the belief that Astartes existed to protect humanity rather than rule it, and that precision was preferable to brute force. The most significant development for the chapter's future came with the Rubicon Primaris, the procedure that allowed firstborn Marines to cross the biological divide and become Primaris themselves. For the Raven Guard, with their history of genetic manipulation and the catastrophic Raptor project, this process raised particular concerns. Chapter apothecaries studied the procedure extensively before implementing it, analyzing potential interactions with the unique aspects of Raven Guard gene seed. Kayvon Shrike himself became one of the first senior officers to undergo the transformation, recognizing that his personal example would be necessary to overcome the chapter's institutional caution. The procedure proved successful, enhancing Shrike's already formidable abilities while preserving the characteristics that defined him as a son of Corax. His crossing of the Rubicon opened the way for other veterans to follow, gradually transforming the chapter's composition while maintaining its essential identity. As the Adeptus Crusade concluded and Imperial forces shifted to consolidation rather than reconquest, the Raven Guard found themselves well-positioned for the challenges ahead. Their operational doctrine, emphasizing small unit operations and strategic targeting rather than territorial control, aligned perfectly with the needs of an Imperium stretched thin across a divided galaxy. Their ability to operate independently with minimal support made them invaluable in regions where conventional supply lines had been severed by the Great Rift. The chapter's ongoing vendetta against the Word-Bearers took on renewed significance in this era. Intelligence suggested that Lorgar himself had emerged from centuries of seclusion, taking a more active role in directing his legion's operations across multiple sectors. This development, combined with increased sightings of the transformed Corax hunting Word-Bearers' forces, created a sense that ancient conflicts were reaching their culmination. Shrike authorized increased resource allocation to operations targeting Word-Bearers' activity, particularly those involving senior leadership or ritual sites. These missions received priority for veteran personnel and specialized equipment, reflecting their importance to both strategic objectives and chapter morale. The hunt for the architects of the Drop Site Massacre remained as central to Raven Guard identity as it had been in the aftermath of the heresy itself. Similar priority was given to operations against Iron Warriors' forces, whose treachery at Istvan V had contributed directly to the near destruction of the Raven Guard. When intelligence identified Iron Warriors' fortress factories in the Felgrave system, Shrike personally led the strike force tasked with their elimination. The operation demonstrated that even as chapter master, he maintained the field skills that had distinguished him as a company captain, infiltrating the primary fortress alongside a veteran kill team, and eliminating the warsmith commanding the facility before Imperial forces launched their main assault. As the 42nd millennium progressed, the Raven Guard continued to adapt to changing strategic conditions while maintaining their fundamental approach to warfare. New equipment was incorporated into their arsenal, including gravity manipulation technology derived from Primaris designs, but modified according to Raven Guard requirements for stealth operations. Training protocols evolved to address emerging threats, with particular emphasis on countering the psychic capabilities that had become more prevalent following the expansion of the Great Rift. Throughout these adaptations, the chapter maintained its connection to its origins. Regular pilgrimages to the liberation monuments on Deliverance reminded even Primaris Marines of the chapter's foundational purpose: to fight oppression and protect the vulnerable. The lessons of Istvan V remained central to tactical training, emphasizing the importance of operational security and contingency planning. Most significantly, the example of Corax himself, both in his original form and his current warp-touched manifestation, continued to guide the chapter's approach to warfare and its broader purpose within the Imperium. The shadow of the Raven thus extends across the war-torn galaxy of the 42nd millennium, falling upon traitors and Xenos alike. From the void-scarred battlefields of the Pariah Nexus to the demon-haunted worlds along the Great Rift, the Sons of Corax continue their eternal hunt. Their methods may evolve and their warriors may change, but their essential nature remains constant. They are the shadow that strikes unseen, the vengeance that comes without warning, and the guardians who stand between humanity and the darkness that threatens to consume it. And somewhere in the twisted reality of the warp, a shadow moves with purpose, no longer merely a Primarch, but something both more and less, hunting those who betrayed their oaths 10,000 years ago. The Raven Lord continues his own mission, transformed but unbroken, a manifestation of judgment against those who turned from the Emperor's light. Whether he will ever return to his sons remains unknown, but his legacy endures in every precision strike, every shadow operation, and every victory achieved not through overwhelming force, but through the careful application of strength precisely where it is needed most.